Hey, what's up, my friends? Hey, yo, as I like to say. Dan Tom here with the Protect Your Neck podcast. The host with the actual co host this time. Of course, hello, thank you for everybody joining. Try to get guests in for the pay per views. Actually, doing that this time with the gentleman that, yes, I can confirm he is real. I've talked fights with him before, and he is just as tall and just as handsome as you see. Do not adjust your screens. He is not an AI image. He is Luca Fury. At Luca Fury, Fury's fight picks on Patreon. I'm sure he's gonna plug his stuff here in a second, as he is welcome to do. But man, I am just so stoked and grateful to welcome Luca. Luca, what's up, man? Thanks for joining us.
Well, thanks so much for having me here. I know we've been talking about doing this for a bit of time. We actually, both living in Las Vegas, have met up in there in person. We've talked some fights. We've had some really great conversations, some very in-depth stuff. And so I've been excited to join up and share that to the public, as I think we could be a very good analytical team.
I think so too, man. I think we had like 3 or 4 podcasts we were joking that we cut, just
Hmm.
kind of like cruising around whatever pay per view or international fight week maybe it was. I don't know. It's all kind of a blur these days, but I do quite clearly remember our conversations, and it was really good. So we're happy to share that with you. We talked about going on each other's shows. I've had, as my guests know, and as you, I was just joking, like off screen, like not joking, but like just saying, like you're one of the few people who understand Luca as far as the grind. You're a guy who not just does this, but a lot of people do this or attempt to do this, and a lot of people have attempted and continue to attempt to emulate you, my friend. You've kind of set the standard, so to speak, for a lot of MMA gamblers, right? Let's be real here. But at the same time, it is. Sorry, we're getting some chats up in here. Thank you guys for joining. It is honestly just great. Sorry, I'm talking in a circle here. It's honestly just great to have you on here, man. And we're already getting a lot of people up in here. So appreciate that. What's up, James Kendrick in the house? We got Meikatu Kayagoku. What's going on there? Ghost Phantom. What's going on, Ghost Phantom? Asher Quinn. Awesome. Thank you guys for joining. Obviously, like usual, hit me up in the chat. Feel free to distract me, as I'm clearly easily distracted. We're gonna try to just get fairly to things, not too much to recap or shout out here. And we'll be breaking the card down from top to bottom. If you're listening in the future, check the timestamps on the show notes. Whether you're listening on YouTube, hello, like, subscribe to join the chat, or like and subscribe in general. It helps. If you're listening on iTunes, five-star Apple ratings and reviews are always very helpful on that platform. But yeah, you can always check the timestamps to jump ahead. We recap picks and plays at the very end. Again, we're not going to hold you, Luca. I don't hold myself these days. We were just talking. It's hard to get through every fight. So between now and fight day, our picks may change. You check me on fight day at the normal places. Check Luca on Twitter. You can see his name tag there, at Luca Fury. He's got his Patreon where he has all his content, and he make sure to get his bets and picks out for his followers there if you want to keep up to, what he's got. So as long as we're all set there, man, I'm stoked to talk about this card. But first, we have last weekend. Luca, you're smart and you only stick to UFC, right? And I mean that seriously. I'm not making a joke here.
Yeah, it's interesting. So you and I are two of the betters, I should say, who have been in the fight game for quite a long time now. You talked about how I've been obviously around for quite a long time, going on 13 years now, but you've been around quite a long time as well, especially considering the general turnover that happens in the fan base. I mean, if you look at not just fans, but even the media, it's usually about maybe 5 years, and then it's all of a sudden a whole new cast of media members, a whole new employees at websites. I mean, the turnover in MMA is pretty quick relative to other sports where you have, lifelong Patriots fans and that. So going out, and being around the sport for so long, I've definitely been able to kind of fine-tune my betting strategy to some extent. And it's not that I'm not profitable on the other organizations, just like I'm sure it's not that you're not profitable on them. But I did realize over time that my ROI and the time investing that I was spending on them was simply not comparable to the UFC. Like my ROI was at least double on the UFC, if not more. And so if you think about it, we don't have infinite time. We all have to do time management and figure out what we're going to prioritize. And say you have, just for argument's sake, say you only have 3 bets that you could research per week. Obviously, it's more than that. But again, for argument's sake, well, if you have 3 bets per week, shouldn't you focus on the 3 bets that are going to have, say, 10% ROI rather than two bets that have 10% ROI and one bet that has 5% ROI. And so that was essentially what it came down to for me. It's the same reason why I also generally focus more on the UFC main cards rather than the prelims. You run into the same issue. It's not that I was not profitable on the prelims. I was. I'm just significantly more profitable on main cards. And we don't live in a world where we have infinite time. We do have, obviously deadlines and certain time frames that we have to complete stuff, not just over the week, but even on a day-by-day basis. And so, again, it's not that you can't make money on those organizations, but I do feel like there's just better opportunities on the UFC specifically.
Man, you absolutely nailed it. We've talked about this before, and I completely agree. In fact, I was having that same thoughts. Again, I fired off 3 bets, really small, I think, like under a half a unit at Bellator that missed. I just threw at some round props. And I think 2 units even at PFL. I think I played Wade straight up. Researched this one and stated it was just for fun. But regardless, of course, you guys know me. I account for it regardless on my record and on here. But yeah, it was sorry, Luca, I'm doing the walk and talk here.
No worries.
I'm doing I'm sharing it out right now. And obviously, actually, speaking of as I do the walk and talk producer thing here, it is tough to time manage, right? And that's something I realized. So again, I missed the bets, but honestly, I'm not even mad that the bets. It was when you bet something like that, and when you bet in general, you should be obviously okay with what you lose. But this was definitely one where there's terms sweating out bets when you do this for a living and whatnot. And I didn't have to sweat it out because I didn't care, right? And I didn't care so much that I didn't even watch the fight. So the recap again is going to be real short of Bellator PFL because rounding back to Luca's point, basically, I was at my computer and stuff while the fights were going on. It's not that I couldn't watch the fights. Or was out. I was actually out Friday night. Watched John Wick 4. It was awesome. Let me know if you guys, without spoilers and stuff for other people, let me know if you guys like that in the chat. So, living my life and enjoying stuff, making sure, using time appropriately. But like Saturday, for example, on PFL, and even Friday, I was studying the, Chris Curtis, Kelvin Gastelum fight, and I was getting my notes together for the podcast, and I was joking like, oh my gosh, I've almost forgotten what I've watched. Because again, one of the many dangers of watching things too far out is the fight can get canceled, whether it's COVID era or not. In MMA, it's volatile, right? And then there's like
every week we get a
exactly.
cancellation.
And then it's like, are you going to remember your notes? So we'll see how well I do when we get to Gastelum-Curtis, folks, for that. But yeah, to Luca's point, I was like, you know what? I would rather invest into that, looking into southpaw underdogs or just UFC in general. No matter how I wanted to cut it. The numbers, my ROIs, my hit percentages, if you will, all stack up in that area. So why waste time not doing it, to your point, right, Luca?
Mm-hmm. I mean, obviously, when it comes to investing, you do want to diversify to an extent, but you already automatically are diversifying by the fact that you are betting every week multiple plays. It's not like, you're going all in on one play. I would never recommend that, of course. I still use a 1 to 5 unit system where my absolute max bet ever, which is very, very rare, I only have like a single digit number of them per year. It's only 5% of my bankroll. So I could lose 20 max bets in a row, go 0 for 20, and that's what it would take me to lose my whole bankroll, which is essentially impossible. Obviously, it's possible, but on max plays like that, I have a very strong edge, and they hit almost every time, let alone go on a losing streak like that. So my point is, even if you are still, focusing on your higher ROI plays, you still want to be betting a small percentage of your bankroll per play. You still want to have proper bankroll management. So you still want to have, your proper gambling fundamentals. The thing is, though, just like any other form of investing, if you're looking at potentially, investing in multiple houses and you have a bunch to choose from, and some are going to have significantly higher returns, why would you not choose them over the ones that are going to have a lower one? And at this point in time, after doing it for 13 years and tracking my records in detail and all that, I know for a fact that, again, while I am profitable on these other organizations, it's significantly less so. And that amount of time that I'm spending on them could be spent on those other bets in the UFC that's just going to simply make more money in the long term.
Absolutely, and I think another reason why we're a great little dynamic here. You're very responsible, more responsible on most. So it's not that it's not that you can't lose, or if you go out there and be stupid, it's not like you can't drain your bankroll. You're human, you absolutely can, but. Most people are, you said what, roughly 5%. I mean, most people are saying they're aiming for 30%. I'm raising my hand here, and they're maybe pushing that from time to time. Again, I'm raising my hand here. I'm not coming off of a high horse, but just to kind of support your point, what I'm saying here, Luca, as far as that being responsible, and again, knowing your edges. Now, I'm not as responsible or as big when I do take my shots, even when maybe I should, because a lot of times, guys like me and you will have similar reads that'll age fairly well, let's just say. But I'm also, not a guy that goes, and by the way, this is the more fun way. I'm not hating, and a lot of my friends, especially in the Action Network, are very profitable with this, but I'm not like a big, massive volume better. For me, I'm one of those guys that try to find that balance where I'm trying to air quote, sharp, air quote, is everybody's definition, right, Luca? There's a billion different definitions of that. But yes, I'm trying to steer, obviously, as we all should, toward the sharpish area, try to be responsible, exercise these bankroll management things, but from the dreaded V word, shout out to Joey Odessa, value. I'm also very much a plus number guy in a volatile sport like MMA. I know it's hard to lay down serious money for more serious bettors, like, if I was maybe laying down like more like yourself or people who follow you, those heavier hitters, they will be limited, right? Of course, and we've all been limited at online houses, so I understand that. But I am playing, within that average Joe rating. So I personally like trying to find a balance with keeping it fun and also keeping it sharp. Spreading a shotgun spray out there, but not getting too crazy with the machine gun. Does that kind of make sense, Luca?
Yeah, I was actually going to say, like, a comparison I like is some people are snipers, some people spray and pray, some people have kind of the middle balance where they're more of the shotgun, like you said. And I feel like you definitely, as a sports bettor, need to kind of find which one suits you, because I feel like there's not a right answer to it. I feel like certain people are better at certain ones. And it also depends on bankroll, what kind of books are available to you, because for someone like me, if I sign up to a book under my name, Luca Fury, they know exactly who I am. I'm immediately limited. I don't even have to bet at the book. They limit me like right off the bat. Like I can't even use like other names. They'll know my IP and everything.
Yeah.
Like there's much less options for someone like me to be able to be betting props, for example. And even when I can bet props, the limits, are just paltry compared to a money line. On a Conor McGregor money line, you can get down six figures, mid six figures even. On a Conor McGregor prop, you're lucky to maybe get down $1,000 unless you're basically labeled as a square and a book will let you. But if you have any track record of success, it's so hard to get money down on props unless you're spreading it out across multiple books. And this becomes kind of a chore at that point. And so for me, I tend to be more of a sniper with my bets because I don't really have a choice. I kind of have to be. But I do still try to dabble in the props here and there because even with the small limits, I've hit this year alone already some multiple plus like 300s and plus 400-ish area. So, even if you can only get, say, down $1,000 on that, well, that hits, that's 4,000. Whereas if you're betting, say, 20,000 on a minus 500, you're winning the same 4,000. It's actually the same profit in the end. And so I'm actually betting even bigger than that. So that's also why props don't actually quite make sense to me. But
sure, absolutely.
I do still, when the value's there and it's apparent, I'll still sprinkle on them, but I do envy the people who can actually, they have a greater variety of books they can use, and it's the way that they're limits, it's more, makes more sense to bet those props because I would say right now, the two biggest areas that have value in MMA, money lines and totals, they still have value, of course, but live betting is the biggest one and props is number two.
Absolutely. That's fantastic breakdown. And, to be Hans Gruber talking to Joe Takagi and Die Hard, we could talk men's fashion all day, but I'm afraid work must intrude. Obviously, this is work related, and this is, I believe, very beneficial talk that I would assume is interesting to especially the betting portion of our audience. So I definitely don't want to cut it short, but I do want to be respectful of times, and I think that's a great point too. Just that we left it off on. We kind of showed some of our the ways we like to framework, if you will, frame our work. So, again, play to your edges. That's something that I always say. That was a message in different wording that Luca gave to, different strokes for different boats, of course. And we all have our edges. Hopefully, we'll be able to talk about some of those, and some of these fights will border close to those edges. That's what gets us excited. Not to use sexual term here, but edge and excitement. But no, seriously, it's what kind of prompts, whether we're just, we talked about that. There's some fights you're just watching as a fan, and that's more than fine, by the way. That's great. That's healthy. But there are fights, that you are excited because you like some numbers. And there's some of that for both of us, perhaps. So before we get to that, I'm gonna get some seeing some funny some fun. So you guys are adopting my nicknames for the slap league. I love seeing or fighters. It's amazing. What's up, Rain Lamina? Kyle Johnson in the house. versus my Bellator/PFL LFA bets. He says less time to study, but also more variance with lower level fights. Absolutely, and which is kind of a reason why both me and Luca, which I don't know how much we touched on, but we're on the same page on this. We don't spend too much time on the prelims unless, for example, there were 2 fights that I chose to target coming up, folks. So stay tuned, and it did end up being bets. Spoiler alert. But it takes certain things to entice us there. And if we're going to hold that standard for a UFC card, well, why should we not see the same, viewpoint that Kyle had, which I believe is correct. A lot of high variance there as well.
That's one thing that I'm always surprised that people don't take into account more. There's a lot of matchups that you can look at and specifically know this is just a high variance matchup, and the line will be like a pick'em where you're not really getting value in that high variance matchup. It's not like you're getting a big underdog or something, and people will just hammer those over and over again, and then when it ends up being some weird result where like the guy was winning and then got knocked out and they come from behind, they're shocked when it's like. That was always going to be the matchup, and that's, I guess, kind of a bit of a preview for the main event, as we'll get into in a moment here. But that's one of those types of fights where it's just like, not to say that you can't find an edge, but you have to know what you're getting into there.
And when it does hit, it's almost kind of worse, you could argue. It's like one of those, like when a fighter wins a fight that, they arguably shouldn't have won. They fought dumb
or something?
Yeah. Like, you're like, what do you mean? How they get double their check and this and that? Like, I obviously understand the immediate benefit, but they arguably weren't ready for this level in the first place. And the fact that they got that decision, they're going to get bolstered, way ahead, and it's really going to hurt them. I think, like, Nick Maximoff was one of many fighters recently where I mentioned that. I'm like, I know Puna's my guy. I know I bet him. But aside from that, objectively, it was one of the worst decisions. And objectively, forget all of that being my guy or my bet. That actually was bad for Maximoff. He was not ready, and then you see him wanting to quit on the stool, a Diaz guy of all guys, right? Like, and that it was not shitting on Maximoff. It was because they put him in a spot where he wasn't ready. But bad bets cash all the time, to quote my guy Johnny the Greek there. And again, there are people that will dive specifically into prelim spots. My guy Clint, you've been on his show. He will. We talked about our process before, and Clint, and he's public about this too. He will go kind of opposite. He'll go. I work from the top down because that's what I get paid to do, right? But he will go from the bottom up, trying to mine for gold. And there is some return there, and again, you're still looking at UFC fights at the end of the day, is the way matchmakers format cards. There's actually some good fights on the prelims, so it's not that there's nothing good on the prelims. Don't misconstrue what we're saying. And again, shouts to guys like Clint and other people who kind of specialize on looking for those spots. I'm gonna have Clint probably on hopefully on a show coming up here, by the way. But yeah, like for me and Luca, for example. We're both kind of picky, so I'm not saying that like, oh, we're better or whatever. I'm just saying like I always say in my disclaimers for my shows, if you're expecting for me to go in-depth on the prelims, I never do. And I was just telling my guy Luca that. I'm like, don't worry about not going in-depth on the prelims. My audience hopefully should be used to that. I very much pick my spots. I'm a sniper in that way, but maybe I'm just like one of those weird first-person shooter games, Luca, where they let you put the the scope on the shotgun and get surgical. Maybe that's what I'm running around with, I don't quite got the AWP like you over there.
Yeah, there is one prelim fight that I know we're both interested in, so I'm sure we'll talk about that. Good fight, and also some potential from a betting perspective. So, yeah, like you were saying, the UFC, I don't know what exactly they're doing with the bout order. I know you and I have talked about this both on our podcast as well as just in private to each other. The UFC's bout order is something that's a bit interesting these days, to say the least. But at least when they do put on a good fight in the prelims, it gives you some reason to actually tune in. But I wish they would definitely adjust a little bit, to say the least, what they're doing with some of the main cards.
Yeah, me and you definitely sound off on a lot of that as well, as far as that goes. I want to get some shouts out of the way, Lucas, so we can start this party. And I also really want to drink this. I've been looking over, wanting to drink it. I'm like, I got to wait for the shout. That's how you know it's something good. And even though I'm not in the field of being really business savvy to field a lot of sponsors, I do like what really successful people say, who can be like successful enough to be like, you know what, I only like getting behind something if I really like it. And I'm not successful, and you know what, I still think that's a really good thing to go by. And I want to shout out my guy Dustin Love, D loves _turmeric, turmeric, or theturmeric.com is the more important address. That's where you can buy this stuff. Use code PROTECT15 for 15% off. It's really good. It's a turmeric, ginger, and some lemon juice, which I know make you guys sound like, ooh. It's actually a really good mix of it, and the stuff's just super beneficial. Been going through a lot of health stuff, like I always tend to do, or if you're just training and whatnot. Like I'm trying to bring some inflammation down, and I got a nice quick workout in before the show, which was a nice part about extending it a little longer, which is cool. But it's really good for you. It's fantastic. It's a little too late to have coffee. I'm trying not to drink like soda or whatever even, but like it really wakes me up and energizes me. So shout out to my guy for the care package. That's the turmeric. Make sure it's TURMERIC. There's like a silent R there is why I spell it out. So when you're doing your address, theturmerictonic.com, make sure you mention that. I want to shout out my guy MMAI, always pumping out excellent content. He's at MMAI_analytics on YouTube, and you can, I think, just type MMAI analytics after the @ sign on Twitter, and you should be able to find him. I just wanted to give my guy a shout there. Subscribe to his channel. And
he does great stuff.
Yeah. I know you're a fan of his too as well, Luca. He's a really, really great stuff. Good dude coming up in the community. And then SBC, apparently it was like one of the more higher ranked spinning back clicks as far as audience is concerned on the MMA Junkie YouTube channel. I was a part of it this Monday. I'm not saying that's why, but I am thanking my audience who made up for whatever percentage of the pie you guys did. I was very appreciative. I love chopping it up and getting heated. And I said probably a bunch of stupid stuff that was incorrect because again I didn't even watch the shows. I think I said the Game Bred boxing thing was in Florida because I just assumed it was Game Bred boxing, and how many boxing crazy crap goes in Florida. But hey, again, not defending the Shabs of the world or things like that people could say, but like I do defend as far as when you are live on camera a lot and you got to speak, you are going to say stupid stuff, and I always say I'm not beyond it. Case in proof. Not that I got any crap for it. It's just it's stuck in my head because I'm wired like that, right? But I just wanted to thank you guys with a positive on that, and that concludes the shouts. I think we're ready to break down the fights here. Sigro Wing in the house. Does that drink also work 60% all of the time? I should know that. Is that an Anchorman reference? But it's more than 60%. But yes, great reference there.
I think that's an Anchorman reference, but it reminds me of the Tim Sylvia quote from way back in the day, showing my MMA fandom age here, nice. Where he said the fight game is 90% half mental.
Oh my gosh, yeah. The original Tito Ortiz, and speaking of Dana's white power slap, Sylvia's going to do that. Oh my God, that's terrible. Wasn't he like just... I thought he had like an arm infection. He had brain issues that he claimed, and then he had like some arm infection where I saw like a GoFundMe that I helped share around years back. And like people were like, why don't you step up UFC to pay for it? I don't know if UFC or Dana ended up paying for the guy's arm surgery, but... they offered him I'm sure they're not paying him a 2-on-2. I'm sure they're offering him a semi-less insulting 10-and-10, which is still very insulting, to go get more head trauma. So there's that. I don't want to speak it into existence.
Of all the things, like, as far as Tim Sylvia to get into, like, his only advantage in MMA was his reach. And then that's not even a factor in power slap. You get hit. So it's like the one thing he had going for him. It wasn't like he had a particularly strong chin or power. It was his reach. That was all. So I can't think of much of a worse sport for him to go into as far as post-MMA career.
Yep. Any Action Sportcast says, one time Morning Combat came to Las Vegas and Luca was there. Luke Thomas was faded as hell, but he still showed love to Luca. Of course, man. Luke's awesome and Luca's awesome, man. Again, I met this guy in person. I wasn't making just like... I was making a cheeky line, but it wasn't a joke. Luke is awesome, man. I met this guy in person, met Luke in person. They're both large. It's not a gimmick. They're both very large folks, especially to my 5'9" ass. But yeah, I can assure you that's awesome though. That's awesome to hear. All right, 287, Luca, from top to bottom. We're gonna kick off with. Are they billing it as Alex Pereira versus Israel Adesanya 2, which I guess would make sense, but we'll go with the unofficial 4. Let me get the odds up here because I'm so professional and already had it ready. Best fight. Odds is
I'm tweeting out links to the show. I know I'm looking very professional on my phone over here.
You're good, man. I appreciate the shares and stuff, and and whatnot. It's definitely better than my ass walking and talking. Speaking of Adesanya, by the way, people were like, oh, he's irritable and this and that, and there's definitely a demeanor we can talk about here, Luca. But as far as the press conference goes, or not the press conference, but before the press conference, the interviews in a more secluded room, but not that secluded because people were going in and out and annoying Adesanya, who was trying to think. I will say, especially with my very OCD, ADD, literally. I very much get like that. I'm very sympathetic there because like my concentration, I should say, is very easily broken. You guys get glimpses of that. You got a glimpse early in the show because when I go to share the link, everything's running super slow over here because I'm doing everything from one computer and I'm my own person, and everything is funneled into the same audio. So I just hear my annoying voice blasting into my ear, and I'm trying to talk live in real time while share a link. So that's why I always have that weird like I am walking, talking, sharing a little bit in the beginning. So I again, not going to defend everything Adesanya says or does, obviously, but I will defend him there. Did you catch any of the interviews, and how much of that goes into your analysis? Obviously, I'm guessing a very small portion of the pie, but how much of it do you even bother to go over, Luca, as far as that stuff goes?
It's interesting. I feel like, in a general sense, interviews are mostly useless because fighters will just lie right through their teeth. I mean, there's been multiple examples recently. I mean, Joanna Jędrzejczyk, before she retired, was literally saying in all of her interviews, I have this newfound resurgence. I can't wait to make another run at the title. I've never been so rejuvenated, blah, blah, blah. Literally going out of her way to tell people that she just has this incredible motivation she's never had before. Loses the fight, then says that win or lose, she was retiring. Not that, because I lost, I was retiring. No, she said she was already decided. So for 3 months, she was just lying to people. And that's not an outlier. Like, this is a regular thing with fighters. They will just lie through their teeth about stuff. And so because of that, I don't take things seriously. Like, fighters will say, lies about how much they train or how little, or their motivation. You can even look at boxing. You can even look at like the YouTube boxing, like fighters before and after. Jake Paul, just in his last fight, they literally asked him going into the cage like 5 minutes beforehand, how are you, injury free? And he's like, yes, I've never been healthier, blah, blah, blah. Literally in the cage after, or the ring after, he's going, I had all these injuries and stuff, blah, blah. Like, this is the fight game. And so when it comes to interviews, like, sometimes you can get some little nuggets out of there. Like, for example, Jorge Masvidal talking about retirement, I think is actually something that's noteworthy because if you're a fighter, you don't talk about retirement unless it's something you're actually considering. You want fighters or fans to be like, yeah, we're believing in you making another run. You're going to get another title shot. You don't want them thinking that you're just, phoning it in and, how do you have 1 foot out the door? And so the fact that he's talking about retirement, for example, that's something that, stands out to me. The fact that, sometimes you'll have fighters not talking about their opponents going into matchups. For example, Usman in the second Leon Edwards matchup, all he was talking about was moving up to 205, was completely looking past Leon, and we saw what happened there. So I think there's sometimes, little nuggets that you can take out of them, but I think about 95+% of what fighters say in interviews are total BS.
I agree. I feel like there's two spectrums. A lot of it is in the middle, and a lot of it is useless. But I do feel like it's useful when you are looking for information that you can't find that's not on their Instagrams, they're not posting, and you just want to see like a basic where they're training, And again, obviously they could be training nowhere and be good. They could be training at a good place and shit the bed, right? So again, not everything is an end-all be-all, but yes, if you're doing your due diligence, you need to be having somewhat of a weighted scale. That's why I get mad at judging or the interpretation of criteria where people can kind of get a little wild with it, where they see one perceived big shot and they go, that was the biggest shot of the round, that outweighs everything. It's that's false. If we were actually grading everything on a scale and putting the weight, okay, maybe smaller bits, but more bits overall outweigh that one shot, and B, how much did that one shot really land? Because I didn't see it land the same way you did. It becomes very much perspective, and it kind of breaks down in a similar way for that. And then rounding back to as far as like interviews and what people say, again, you can get too wrapped on one particular narrative. Everybody harps on Joe Rogan for getting on a narrative when he's calling a fight. You can do that breaking down a fight. You can get kind of too scoped in, even if it's something good and legitimate. You can get too scoped into that. So no matter what it is, especially if it's something like interviews, I recommend against it. But again, if you are trying to find certain bits of information and to weigh that proverbial scale, right? You actually do the tape study, this and that, and you kind of are keeping a scale in your head. Let's just say, right? I do believe that it is a part of it, not an important part, but I do believe it is a very useful part. Now, the other end of the spectrum, I said one is a sample size, like just hearing, okay, where are you training? Where are you this? Where are you that? Especially on fight week, because if they don't like doing media, sometimes they can't get away from the UFC mandated media, right? So you get that information there. The other stuff is the more the tinfoil hat stuff, right? And I'm not even talking about tinfoil hat on necessarily long shots or getting lost in a speculation city. It could be like what you said, Luca, about retirement. That's a red flag for bettors, a very normal one. That's not crazy for you to say that at all. And that definitely will play into my analysis when we get to the co-main event. But also other things like, people give crap to the media people. Oh, they're access media and they're just asking questions or this or that. Like, listen, especially like, you want to talk about like the real pros and the guys have been doing the OGs, like the John Morgans of the world. When you are constantly, say what you will about those questions, when you are constantly being around these fighters, constantly being at these events, constantly being at these same fighters, constantly getting a sample size, if you will, of hearing the questions and how they answer, hearing their confidence, seeing their confidence. That is the one thing I do listen to the media members on the ground when they say, Eddie Alvarez, man, I know he's a 3-1 underdog against RDA, which I picked Alvarez on that, by the way. But I felt a lot better about that pick, Luca, when I heard media members like my guy John Morgan on the ground. And again, it's not something you should make even like 10 or 5% of your pie in your decision making, but it is part of it, right? And when those media members are on the ground and those people have that sample size that I don't, are like, oh wow, this guy seems kind of off, or this guy seems kind of confident. Does it mean someone's going to win or lose the fight? Of course not. But does it mean something? Does it fit more into that tinfoil hat category? Yeah. So if you care about that stuff, if you're trying to use that in your analysis, or sometimes I'm having a tough time on a fight, Luca, and I'll be like, let me see here where these guys are at. And that could be a big mistake, because that could send you in the wrong direction if you weight it too much. But it's something that I have to include. Long-winded, but basically it.
No, I totally agree, and it actually goes to, I guess, kind of what I was trying to say before, but I guess didn't do the best job of outlining, is the best things to look for in interviews are the things that fighters are trying not to actually say, where when they're saying, I'm healthy as ever, this is such a great camp, like, that's all BS, or I'm so motivated, it's all BS. Like, fighters aren't going to go in there and be like, you know what, I suffered an MCL and an ACL tear halfway through my camp, so I've been limping pretty bad. I haven't done cardio. I really hope he doesn't push me past the first round. I'm going to gas terribly for the first time in my career. Like, you're not getting that out of an interview. They're going to sit there and go, I'm so healthy. I've been doing the best cardio of my life. I could go run a triathlon right now. That's what they're going to tell you when they're actually going to gas in a minute. So when it comes to fighters in their interviews, you can find the nuggets, but you have to actually be looking and kind of reading between the lines. For example, like you said, maybe it's someone, experienced media member who says they seem up or they seem extra focused that week. When they've actually seen them fight in and fight out over the years, they can actually tell when there is a bit of a difference there that could actually mean something. Same as when you're talking about a fighter who maybe just seems like, again, with that Kamaru Usman example, not really talking about their opponent, seems like a guy who normally very focused on his task at hand isn't very focused. So I feel like that's the best way to look at it, is where look at a fighter who has a certain baseline and then when they trend away from that.
Absolutely. We got my guy Sean Madden in the house, of course. Muay Thai master, striking coach, connoisseur, working with a lot of the pro fighters that you guys see. One of the many people behind the scenes that helps, makes these things possible. If you're a part of a gym, you know what I'm talking about. Sean Madden and one of the real ones. My guy Dan Tom dropping knowledge. He says, always love your insight. That's a huge compliment coming from you, sir. I'll take it. But yeah, I agree on that. One thing Israel Adesanya said, by the way, unless odds shifted massively, I'm going to be reading off of a certain house here because best fight odds suck. We have Israel Adesanya minus 130. Opened the favorite. I believe he opened not too much, but a little bit north of that slightly, and I believe, but Pereira, the sitting champion, despite being 3-0, if you look at it from back to their kickboxing days, plus 110 as an underdog. One thing Izzy said, which is something people were alluding to, and I don't know. I know Izzy can be playful, but it didn't seem like one of those things where you accidentally give it up. But speaking of interviews, he did react a certain way multiple times and kind of slip up and stop himself when saying as far as wrestling being a part of the plan. I know people have been talking about, George Hickman being in his corner. I got a ton of respect for the Hickman brothers and the wrestling. As far as takedown defense and counter wrestling from Brad Riddell or to the improvements of Adesanya, I've definitely cited that camp for improvements in that area. But basically, the question that he kind of jumped to was the assumption, Luca, that everybody is having, and I'm guessing a decent part of the reason, aside from popularity and other things, of course, why Adesanya is the favorite here, which again, we could argue about who should be favored. I'm just glad the line's a little tighter. I think that's where it should be as far as the spread goes. But people are pointing to the wrestling. They're talking about the domination of Israel Adesanya in round 3. Now, many smart people have brought it up. I said it on SBC, thankfully, because my breakdown didn't drop until later in this week. Just a crazy week, folks. I'm not even going to get into it. Just insert typical Dan Tom stuff there. But plenty of people. I think I saw tweets from who's that guy I respect a lot too. He used to fight. I think he does one of the Sirius XM shows. RJ Clifford. Yeah. He did a post on it. I talk about it in my breakdown as well. You guys can see it at MMAJunkie.com. The shares are appreciated, by the way. And I said it on the SBC show in the top of the week on Monday morning, which was lest we not forget that was initiated by Alex Pereira going for a takedown, a step across. Almost like a hip toss attempt. He did it while he was out of position, overexcited. And of course, he actually hurt Adesanya to the body and was winning that round as well until that happened. Just like he was arguably winning round 1 before he got rocked there. Which kind of, I'm going to bounce it back to you with both the wrestling and with this attached, which is kind of a bigger one, Luca. But I just feel like people are making the same mistake with Leon Edwards and Kamaru Usman, where I was telling people that, it's not, regardless of what side you pick, Usman could win, but do not write it off as the 5th round fluke of a head kick. There was another round in there that was won, right? Pereira winning round 2 in this fight. Leon Edwards, of course, winning round 1. But even beyond that, they were arguably doing much better than the round scores and face value and air quotes narrative would lead you to believe when you actually go back and watch the tape. There were seeds that were planted throughout their series, but particular in the fight that is being labeled as a fluke here, air quotes, for Pereira. Again, if you disagree with that, feel free here. It's all friend. We're all friends here, Luca. But what do you feel about the wrestling narrative and overall that parallel as far as a lot of people writing it off as a 5th round fluke?
Well, for starters, I don't think it was a 5th round fluke, although this is a weird, I guess now, quadrilogy that we'll have here in that if you look at a trilogy really in any sports, whether it be boxing, MMA, even another sport like a team sport, generally if you see someone who's 3-0, you look at them and go, okay, that person was better, or that team was better. Maybe they deserve to be 2-1, maybe there's a controversial decision or something in there, but generally when you look at someone and go 3-0, clearly they're the better fighter, right? In this case, I think the reason you're seeing Israel be the favorite is obviously he's, of course, the more hyped fighter and all that, but also because I don't really feel like he's been the worst fighter in their 3 meetings so far. The first meeting, he loses a controversial decision, which a lot of people think that he won, and you can make a great case for that. Second time, he almost knocks out Alex. He gets saved by the 8 count. And then he goes on to get knocked out himself in a fight that he was winning. So that's 2 fights now that you could argue that he was just about to be 2-0 in. And then in the third fight, he almost knocks out Alex at the end of the first round, saved by the bell, absolutely, totally would have been finished if there was just 10 more seconds there. And then he goes on to be winning the rest of the fight and be just a couple of minutes away from winning a decision. And then he gets, obviously, stopped and TKO'd. So if you look at the overall, 3 times that now they fought, twice in kickboxing, once in MMA, it's been a significant portion of time. It's not like, it's just a couple of 1-round fights and maybe they traded knockout wins or something. We've got to see them actually play out and their styles mesh a very good amount. And so far, Israel Adesanya seems pretty clearly to be the better fighter. That does not mean, though, that he necessarily wins at a higher rate long term, because there's been lots of times throughout MMA and kickboxing history where the better fighter has lost consistently to someone who just simply has their number, whether it's because they have a certain style that goes well against them or they just have the power. And as we've seen now in multiple fights, Israel has a great chin. You've seen him take big shots from, Gastelum and that survive, but Alex has the power to put him out cold. He has the power to hurt him even late in fights when he's tired himself, like we saw last time out. And so I don't think that any of their performances or their results were fluky, even though I think that overall Israel is the better fighter. It's just that on a long enough timeline, when he's in the cage with or ring with Alex, he's going to get knocked out. He's going to get hurt eventually. And so the question is, can he hurt and stop Alex first, or can he just survive and fight basically a perfect fight for 25 minutes and end up getting his hand raised? And so that's why we were talking about earlier in terms of high variance matchups. If Israel goes out there and avoids that big shot and wins the 5-round decision, everyone's going to be going, about him. Oh, yeah, see, I told you I had such a great read on this, blah, blah, blah. Alex is never going to, replicate the left hook. Or vice versa, if he gets hit with the left hook, everyone who bet on Alex is going to go, see, I told you he couldn't survive it. When in reality, it's probably pretty close to 50-50 in terms of what ends up happening on fight night.
Yeah, I think that's a great point. And that's why I don't get too hung up in, wrong guy favored or this or that or disrespect, because I'm just more happy they made the line closer than last time, because it is, to your point, much closer, much more higher variance. Both those descriptors are apt. And I agree. Nothing you said was incorrect. I, in fact, scored it for Adesanya. I scored it more, more passionately for him the first watch. It's funny. This is another reason why you should rewatch things, even with fighters that you are familiar with. Some fighters, and I'll tell you which ones I didn't necessarily do a dive on because I'm really, really familiar with them. But sometimes for example, Izzy Alex 1, I go back and watch that, the kickboxing one, and I feel different ways about it, and I'm much more sympathetic after more rewatches as far as the judges scoring it for Alex, even though I'm still a 29-28 Adesanya guy. I thought the standing 8 count in the second fight in kickboxing was BS, right? He was saved by that, just like he was saved by the bell in round 1 in their most recent fight in MMA at UFC 281. And to even add on to that point, and perhaps justification for the Adesanya favorite, I felt like they probably could have, even though he saved him, and I said that in my breakdown, I said that on the night of, that doesn't mean I'm not sympathetic to the other side of, just because I cashed my bet with Alex that night, right? No, I feel like, yes, even though safety first, I understand, obviously for Adesanya's sake, then the bettors, he's the one in there making the choice for the head trauma. But I am sympathetic with Adesanya's protest for, let it go on longer. I believed it was pretty much inevitable it was going to happen. But yes, to your point, and to anybody defending Adesanya, by the way, or backing Adesanya or whatever, I am with you on all those points. But the funny thing is the BS standing 8 count. He was saved by the bell at UFC 281 in MMA. But we could also look at it and go, man, Izzy won how many rounds from a scorecard perspective? He had him in trouble how many times from a stoppage perspective? And not only did Alex still win, if we actually go back to these instances where he was hurt, he came back, looked his best, either outright knocked Izzy out and or won the round, right? I mean, you could really check off 2 of those 3 boxes for any of those scenarios. In other words, Alex comes back strongest after those moments, and no matter how long the fight goes after those moments, the result is Alex winning. Not to be too reductive, but it's just to point out, it's funny how perspective works, right, Luca?
Mm-hmm. Well, I also think you make a great point in that there's definitely something to how fighters recover, because as we'll talk about with the fighter later on, with Ponzinibbio, he's someone who does not recover well when you hurt him. He takes a prolonged amount of time. He's very hard to actually knock out and put out cold, but he gets hurt. Even go back to his Lorenz Larkin loss earlier in his career, he gets hurt and he just keeps getting hit with these punches where he's just not defending, he's not putting his arms up. If he just had better recovery and actually played some defense, he probably could have survived that onslaught, but because he just did not recover well or quickly, that's ultimately why he got TKO'd there, and ultimately why he struggled in some other fights, even fights where he says he's lost a decision where he's gotten hurt in them, because he just doesn't fight very well after getting hurt. And that's something you'll see from fighters throughout MMA history. There are certain fighters who they get hurt and they are just a different fighter after. Another one we'll talk about, Rob Font. You hurt this man a single time, it does not matter if he's putting on one of the greatest performances in UFC history. You don't even have to knock him down. Just sting him with one good shot. He falls apart. So there are fighters where they just cannot face that adversity and come back. They just fall apart. Alex Pereira is not one of those fighters. He actually, as you mentioned, fights at least as strong, if not stronger afterwards. It was thought that he had the worst cardio going into their last meeting, and I generally do think that he does, but he was still able to hurt Izzy in the 5th round, even after he'd been almost knocked out himself. And so I definitely think that is a very salient point you're making, where I don't know if Izzy can really recover from being hurt by Alex. It might just be that as soon as he gets hurt, he's either put out cold like in their second meeting, or he ends up getting TKO'd like in their third one, whereas Alex, even though obviously he had some, benefits with the bell and that, at least he actually recovered and was able to fight on. And I do also agree with you about it being an early stoppage in the last meeting. I had no money on the fight, but I think in a title fight like that, considering the stakes, do I think he was probably getting put out regardless? Yes, probably, but we've seen crazier things than that happen. And again, this is a world title fight with huge stakes. This is not some prelim opener, some curtain jerker, or even some main card, banger between some prospects. This is, two of the highest level fighters. They deserve the chance to actually seal the deal. And potentially, if we did get more of a firm stoppage there, maybe we don't even have this immediate rematch.
Yeah, absolutely. And for that reason, I feel like I kind of like that, any angles as far as going to decision. And by the way, this is high variance, like Lucas said. You're going to be sweating no matter what. So don't get it twisted. There is no easy bet here, but I do like it, and that's what I do like as far as the grappling for it, where if Adesanya gets rocked and you're playing on a more over or decision angle, I don't think he gets much done. Again, he was 0-3 in takedowns. I think they credit him for being 1-3, but again, the one takedown they credit for was more of an Alex mistake than anything. So he's not a guy who traditionally wrestles. So again, he's got great trainers, but I don't know how well he was in the first fight. We had a comment here about that, actually. Riosos in Truesdale said, I heard this from Slacky J, but he said that Izzy's clinch entries were good, but the striking within the clinch was concerning for Izzy. Alex P looked very strong in the clinch. He did look strong, but here's the thing that's even more concerning is that he was winning the clinch, which was a point that I brought up with Ryan Wagner in our recap. I told you guys to, on Twitter. Doesn't hurt to go listen to our recap of that. And I'm glad to hear when I went back to listen that DC and commentary were giving credit to just body work in general, which of course fighters will, because fighters know that body work is the real deal. But pointing out those knees in the clinch, those body knees were really taking it out. The body, obviously the legs, which Izzy complained about. Alex was quietly stacking damage there. Again, kind of like planting those seeds back with the Leon Edwards-Usman comparison, at least my analysis on the take. We'll see if the result goes the same way here for the sitting champion to retain as a dog odds. That's always nice if you can, be on that side. In hindsight.
People forget.
Sorry,
People forget, too, about the fifth round where Izzy stumbled because of, I think, he threw a kick and Alex checked it?
Yep.
But then he stumbled back because his legs had been damaged throughout that fight between the checked kicks from Alex as well as Alex actually going to him as well.
Yeah, exactly. So, and something I brought up in the breakdown, because I went to watch Pereira's kickboxing, and people that aren't familiar, clinch was not a big part of his game there. And particularly with Adesanya, even very brief moments, Adesanya always had superior frames, positions, and clearly, obviously, outstruck him throughout their series as far as in kickboxing goes. So for MMA, that to be Adesanya's kind of his plan in the first one, at least a plan B of sorts, right? We can assume. It seems to be more of a prominent plan going into this one. To me, that's very problematic.
That's my concern, though, about this one is I know a lot of people are pointing to, now Izzy can open up with the wrestling, but I feel like that was also the angle for their last one, and he showed that he tried that a bit. Like you said, he went 0-3 on the takedowns. He got in some clinches, and, as a commenter pointed out, Jack Slack saying, 100% agree there. Izzy looked good in terms of the fundamental grappling. He obviously was the better grappler and the better clinch grappler, but Alex just looked strong, like physically strong in the clinch. Like Izzy just couldn't really do anything. Like he seemed to just almost get stonewalled even when he would have advantageous positions or advantages in terms of the underhooks. Like he just couldn't really do anything. And so if you're talking about who's going to improve more since that last meeting, obviously Izzy can go and, have a more dedicated wrestling attack, sure, but is he really going to become a dramatically better grappler and wrestler in this amount of time after he's already been training in MMA for how long? And I'm sure he's obviously been working on his grappling extensively to try to, shore up his weaknesses. Or in the case of Alex, he's been training MMA much shorter. So if anyone's going to make a significant improvement to the grappling, I would actually more expect it to be Alex here than Izzy. Not to say that I do expect it, but I'm just not so sure that, Izzy's going to go out there looking like a D1 wrestler all of a sudden. I think that he's probably going to have similar levels of success to what we saw in the last meeting, just maybe he's a bit more prone to actually go for those clinches and takedowns. I'm just not so sure it's going to be all that successful.
Absolutely. And to your point, I don't think he's going to improve as much because, technically, we saw, like, physicality. I think even people that are Izzy fans that were picking and betting Izzy would be like, oh, he's going to lose the physicality in close, but can the technique make up for it, right? And technically, he was doing really good stuff once he got Alex down. Once he was on top of Alex, I should say. He was trapping the hands, making him carry his weight, draping his weight over on top, not overcommitting to hooks, not getting heavy in front. Again, fighting the hands, doing technical stuff, positioning, leg riding. Like, he was doing all these things, and he still wasn't able to get the finish or drain Pereira enough, which was his first 5-round fight. And by the way, you will back to watch Alex Pereira's 5-round fights. He actually can win fights going 5 rounds. His pace is actually good. He's more aggressive the second time around in rematches, despite his rematch record being poorer at 3-3 in kickboxing compared to Israel Adesanya's 5-1. It's a deceptive 3-3. A lot of those you could have argued one guy won where the other guy lost, kind of like the Lawler and Hendricks dynamic, where you could swap the results. There's a lot of that with Poatan. But back to the wrestling there, he couldn't get him as tired. So Poatan's going to be more confident as being champion. You get that boost of confidence. We saw it with Leon Edwards, right? But also there's the more scientifically verifiable confidence of, okay, I was able to go 5 rounds in MMA because Alex purposely said before the fight he was worried, and he was going to purposely pace himself. But the fact that he could be on the losing end of rounds, the losing end of grappling exchanges, survive that and still come out, that's going to make him, more confident. And to your point, I also agree, Luca. I think he is the guy that's going to learn more. Not only do you have guys like Glover, who, looking at their footage, Glover's smartly drilling my favorite getup, which is the single leg getup from half guard. It's super high percentage. But not only that, like, if you look at the way Pereira was getting up, again, Adesanya being super technical, all those layers I just listed, all those joking Chuck Liddell memes going around, well, that's what Pereira was doing. He was doing like 2005, Chuck Liddell, 2004, I'm just going to stand up. He wasn't even fighting the hands. Like, it was so raw that you can, again, perspective here, we can either criticize Pereira for losing that round, for being raw and failing to fully get up and separate, which he failed to do, right? Or we can look at it and go, dude, the guy is brand new. Of course he's going to make raw mistakes. But if we look at it, people forget, like, oh, he comes from kickboxing. He has all these accolades. He wasn't doing kickboxing from childhood, folks. He didn't start fighting professionally in kickboxing until he was 22. He had a little bit of boxing before that. But this guy was a late bloomer. He didn't even start martial arts until his 20s. So again, we can look at it as that's a negative. He got a late start. He's older now, right? Oh, he's cutting a lot of weight. We can go down that road. Or we can look at it and go, oh, this guy got a late start and he went to boxing. He went to kickboxing, at the top of the UFC heap, not in a strong division, easy pathway. Yes, but I'm just saying the guy, say what you will about his pathway and the politics involved with that, the guy is clearly a fast learner. He's clearly an athlete. He is clearly an athletic cheater, not just an athlete. Like, he's got the death touch, right? So I agree, Luca. He's probably the guy that can improve more, and I think that's a mistake for them to try to set up their winning conditions that way. Because again, there's 2 ways to set up winning conditions. It's find a way to repeat the 3rd round for 5 rounds straight, which is hard to do for a wrestler that actually grew up wrestling, much less a guy who has been kickboxing the majority of his life. And now we're gonna expect him to wrestle on the highest stage when he kind of failed on it at some levels earlier. To your point, Luca, I think the path here is pressure forward, but on the feet. Sorry, go ahead. What do you think of that?
I was going to say also, it's interesting that if you're looking at it from a narrative or a mindset perspective for Izzy, and like we talked about earlier, try not to get too much in the heads of these guys, but if you are talking about a guy who you're 0-3 against, you've been knocked out, and now TKO lost your title against, do you really feel good about going out there and laying praying a 5-minute or 5-round decision? And it's like, oh yeah, I got my hand raised, I just laid on top of him for 5 rounds, and everybody's saying I fought scared and was terrified. Like, I don't feel like that's actually him getting vengeance. Like, I feel like in his mind, to actually get revenge on Alex, he has to not just win, but he has to go out there and either dominate or put a stop to him and actually knock him out clean and put him out cold. So, not to say that, he's going to let his ego completely dictate his strategy and stuff, but if we're talking about a situation where maybe he's in there, he's trying to grapple, it's not really working all that well, very easily could see him just go, F it, I'm going for the kill, I'm just going to try to strike with him because, the grappling isn't really working. That said, if the grappling is working like a charm, he's getting takedowns easily, okay, then yeah, maybe he still goes with it. But I just feel like in these types of matchups where you have guys with pride on the line and stuff, you'll see them go out there, try to get the finish, and sometimes overextend maybe a little bit, maybe put themselves into trouble. And so I think in this situation where Israel, if he's going to go out there and actually, again, get his vengeance, he has to do it in more of a clear way than just kind of grinding out Alex. Not only that, even if he wants to do that, even if he just, straight up grind, lay and pray type of game plan, let's not forget what happened in that last meeting. That was basically absolute worst case scenario for Alex. He goes out there, basically gets knocked out in the first round. He's losing the fight. His cardio should be affected based on, almost getting knocked out like that. He gets taken down. He gets, time spent on his back. Again, pretty much worst case scenario. I mean, if you're looking at, that fight going into it, say it hasn't happened yet, and we just have some magical crystal ball and we say, here's how the fight's going to play out. Israel's going to get a takedown. He's going to get minutes of control. He's going to be winning pretty much all of the rounds. He's going to basically knock out Alex at the end of the first round. Who do you think is going to win the fight? You'd be like, well, obviously Izzy's going to go out there and absolutely easily win, right? But he didn't. And it kind of speaks to your larger point you made before, too, in terms of the grappling. Izzy had these positions. He had these opportunities. He was on top of a very green Alex, and he still couldn't really threaten all that much, couldn't really do all that much in terms of real potent offense. So why is he suddenly going to be able to now? Is he really this late in his MMA career, this late in his life career, suddenly just going to turn into some Damian Maia Jacare type grappler? I just don't see it. So again, not to say that he doesn't have a grappling advantage and will try that on Alex. I do think he probably will, and he does have the advantage, but I'm just not sure it's actually going to be all that much different of a dynamic compared to their last meeting.
I agree. Tony Baloney says perhaps Izzy needs body locks and trips instead of traditional takedowns. I don't disagree with the logic there, but I think it's more single legs. If I was coaching someone to take a guy like Pereira, I want to make him balance because he's essentially a heavyweight, so you got to wrestle him like a heavyweight. And like DC says, make him dig for underhooks to get him tired, make him balance on one leg, baby. But again, to me and Luca's points here, that's not Adesanya's game. Why should it be his game now? Does it mean he can't get one? Sure, he can, but even if he can, what can he do with it? And then if he can't get a finish with it, can he consistently replicate those win conditions? If you look at the common thread, aside from the round one where he hurts him off the back foot, which, by the way, Adesanya is the better back foot fighter of the two. But, by the way, that doesn't mean Alex hasn't won decisions jabbing off his back foot before, which he has in kickboxing, so I'm not discounting him there. I'm just saying that both fighters had the majority of their success if you go back through the entire series. The common thread is the majority of success is they are going forward. They are going forward, and I think the jab is going to be huge. We saw Izzy, obviously, shout out to Miguel Class with the sticky jab. I think I put that in my breakdown. But he was using it to kind of get that inside frame, almost like a Tommy Hearns to blind, but then also cuff the inside frame to kind of put a check on that counter left hook that everybody was worried about, which everybody puts too much emphasis on. I'm a Poatan guy, but last fight I was like his splitting right hands, his body work. This fight I'm talking about his jab more because, when we talk about jabs, I did that little edit of a video of Teddy Atlas, who knows a thing or two about the jabs talking, and I actually liked his analysis in comparison to George Foreman, and I actually put a early George Foreman as far as like I put him versus Ted Gullick. It was a really good example to kind of see what Teddy was talking about, and his jab really was just different. It was like a telephone pole. Like, even when it didn't hit clean, Luca, or even when he showed it, whether he showed it, didn't hit him clean, or hit him clean, the reaction was the same, which was Adesanya backed up to the cage, which is bad because, like Robbie Lawler, between the cage and the inner black octagon lines, that's Pereira's preferred kill zone right there. That's where he was operating for most of the fight, and that's a bad move.
Yeah, it's something I talk about. I do a fight study series over on my Patreon where I commentate over the fights, and I will always be pointing out the distance management. It's such an underrated aspect of MMA right now, in my opinion. It was a huge part of the Kamaru Usman and Leon Edwards matchups, for example. You look at their second meeting, Edwards was willingly, choosingly backing himself up into the cage. Usman was not forcing him there. Usman was just following him there as Edwards was backing himself up there. But in the first 90 seconds of that fight, Edwards is using super tactical lateral movement, and Usman's useless. He can't get him up against the cage, nothing. As soon as Edwards backs himself up, it's about 90 seconds into the first round. That's when Usman clinches, gets a takedown, and then the fight plays out as it does. So in the third fight then, Edwards, of course, doesn't do that. He uses a bunch of lateral movement all throughout the fight. He's very tactical about it. He makes that adjustment. And once again, Kamaru Usman is useless, has no way to effectively pressure him. And so with this meeting, much like we saw in their last meetings, including their last fight, when Israel was up against the cage, that was when he struggled the most. When we saw him get finished, that's when he was up against the cage. And Alexis tried to set him up there multiple times throughout the fight. He was trying to kind of inch him in that position. He tried to set up some combinations with the left hook and all that. And Izzy had done a good job of avoiding it early, but again, when we talk about Alex, it's only that one shot, and over the course of 25 minutes, you kind of have to fight that perfect fight. And so I do agree that an absolutely huge key here for Izzy is to be able to keep his back off of the cage, not be the one on his back foot. He can do some stuff off of his back foot if he's using some longer strikes and maybe just sort of pot shotting, kind of being a sniper, but he does not want to get into any kind of extended duration exchanges, or not even necessarily exchanges, but just an extended period where he's constantly the one on his back foot and he's circling around the cage and Alex is able to pressure, because not only is he less effective in that scenario, but for the judging and potentially a close fight, that looks a lot better for them as well.
All great points, and I don't disagree. Yeah, and another reason why forward pressure is going to be a thing. But again, you're having to kind of go into that ghost. Did he give up the ghost? Is that still there in the back of his mind? A guy so strong, with his mind, as far as his confidence and stuff. When you're the meme guy, so to speak, right? And now you're being memed all of a sudden. A guy is following you from sport to sport. That's a whole lot to take, and so I have no hate or ill toward Izzy. He gets a lot of crap that is undeserved. That being said, I'm not a defender of everything he says either. Don't get me wrong. I'm just simply stating that I'm only speaking from a technical aspect here. But if there is passion, I do have a bet on Alex Pereira to kind of tie this segment up. I do love me some Poatan. I actually went 1.5 units at plus 120. The line, not that I'm a big line guy. I'm just happy to have plus money. A good bet is I'm not a CLV club guy. A good bet is one that cashes in my book. I try to keep it simple, Luca. But yes, I did get plus 120, 1.5 units. And this is kind of big, but sometimes I'll get these weird feelings like this. And a lot of times, most of the times in MMA, rematches seldom not go the same way. And I feel like that's held true like 95% of the time for the past 2 years as far as the rematches have been going. Now, that meaning it could be maybe Adesanya wins this one, right? And that still holds true. But I still feel like it can hold true even if Pereira wins again. And I'm sticking with my first pick of Pereira by decision. It's not that he couldn't knock him out. Obviously, that was definitely on the table. I just thought maybe we had more of my part of my prediction for going decision last time, Luca, was that I felt like they'd be in each other's head, and Adesanya again fighting more toward the outside. Pereira's not exactly like the most round winner with his style, as cool and as fun as it is, right? So maybe we just get kind of a competitive decision that maybe is even lackluster, not Carlo Rose to extent, but we've seen with the big fighters too, like Ngannou, Lewis, so on and so forth. I feel like that has even more of. I don't want that to be. I want a fun fight, but I feel like a weird decision is more on the table here, and to the points that I made previously, just like with my reasoning with the Edwards, which kind of, again, it was just the last pay-per-view, but both the pieces in my mind are lining up, as well as the outside narrative not learning from the same mistakes, regardless if, they get burned. We'll see what the result is. But again, you're going to put plus 550 out there on Pereira by decision. I ended up actually putting a half unit on that. I was going to just do it. I seldom go 2 units. Again, I'm very much one, even rare 1.5. I was going to go 2 on Pereira. I'm like, you know what? Let me cut it down to 1.5 and just throw a quarter of that as a bonus on there by decision, because he is the more impactful fighter as we've seen. And if it does go to the scorecards, according to the criteria that the judges should, keyword should, be going off of, they should be favoring the more impactful striker. So those are my bets here. I'll probably also have Pereira by decision in a round robin, which is not complete, but there are pieces that I'll throw your guys' way. Anything to close this segment, Luca? Your pick, by the way. Give your pick, or if that's whatever you want to give or not give. You don't have to.
For me, as of now, it's a pass for me. I mean, maybe that changes as I, finish rounding out my research for it, but I just don't really see much of an edge on either side with this one. In terms of a prediction, it's weird because I'm ultimately going to go with Izzy, but I don't feel good about it. As I mentioned, it's a very high variance matchup, and I agree with a lot of the points that you're saying. As I mentioned, I don't think the wrestling is much of a thing that he can pull out of his back pocket like people are expecting. I don't think that the last fight went very well for Alex in terms of, him being rocked, the takedown and all that, and he still managed to find a way to win. So, I definitely think there's a lot of things you can point to for why you would, champion Alex here to get the job done. But ultimately, what I side with is just the fact that going based on their first three meetings, I mean, about 90% of those was Israel getting the better of Alex. And so we can learn from those mistakes in the past fights, maybe fight a little bit more cautiously on the feet, maybe mix in some more takedowns. Maybe, he doesn't go out there and wrestle for 5 rounds. Maybe he wrestles for 2 rounds here. And that's 2 more rounds that Alex cannot get that knockout. And then he only has to, survive 3 rounds on the feet. So ultimately, it's such a tough fight to call. It's one that I just can't really get any conviction about either side. And if they were hitting, a decent underdog price on either side here, I would go with that. But given where the line is, I do favor Izzy ever so slightly. He is an ever so slight favorite. I think the line's mostly accurate, no value for me. So ultimately a pass in that one, but potentially maybe a live betting perspective. If you see certain things, maybe Izzy's fighting a certain way, or maybe he's fighting, poorly in a certain way as well. There's potentially some angles there as well, but even from that perspective, it doesn't really stand out to me as one where I'm going, oh yeah, this is one I have circled for live betting. So probably ultimately one I just pass on altogether. But in terms of a prediction, without any level of confidence, I'm going with Israel. Also, one thing I should touch on real quick, there's that whole stat, of course, that was floating before the Kamaru Usman and Leon Edwards trilogy, where the UFC champions getting immediate rematches. They have a record of 3-11 at the time, now 3-12. Obviously, that is a small sample size, so you can't put too much weight into that. But I do think there is some logic behind that, where if you look at the fighters in those cases, usually they were going to lose anyways. It was kind of like their time was up, where it might not have been that necessarily that, say, Leon Edwards has Usman's number. In fact, I think that Kamaru Usman, if he were to rematch Colby Covington, he would lose that fight now. He almost lost the other one, so I think at this point, with how he's fallen off, I think he would lose that meeting. Let's say, for example, it was Colby Covington in there. They gave him a third fight, and then he goes out there and beats Usman 2 times in a row. We could be easily looking at that situation. And so I do think that there is something with that stat. It's more just that it was the time for those fighters to lose anyways. They were up there in age. The division was getting better. Everyone's trying to beat them, analyzing tape on them, looking for their weaknesses. Like, if you're, say, Kamaru Usman, for example, we'll go back to that fight, and you're the champion for 5 fights, there are fighters in the contender wing where maybe they're two fights away from a title, where you're not even considering them at this point, but they're already looking at you as who's probably going to have the title when they get there if you're a dominant champion. And you'll have fighters, I mean, you know this, training in an MMA camp, Dan, you'll have fighters who are already sort of kind of trying to train for the champion well before they even have that fight booked. It might be years in advance even sometimes. There's been guys who have been training to beat John Jones since like the start of their careers at this point, and now they're just making it to the UFC. So if you're a champion and you're not constantly improving, constantly getting better, you're just staying the same, the division's going to catch up to you, or someone's going to find out your number regardless. But then you add on the age and everything else. I just think it's an issue where it gets to the point where it's just this guy's time, and it may be the case where it just is Izzy's time.
All great points, but especially that last one where fighters are watching and preparing. And I wrote this down because I'm like, oh man, there's so much to take away. Oh man, what are, again, I have so much respect for the Hickman brothers. City Kickboxing's a great camp. Israel Adesanya comes in well prepared. He's got a fighting mind. All these things. What? And then I wrote down here. I'm like, no one watched. You know who watched Izzy Pereira all their fights more than anybody?
Alex Pereira.
Exactly. I was making jokes that like he was like it was my favorite follow after his win. Because he was just living his best life with his beautiful girlfriend. They're both tall, beautiful people there, and she was complaining. It was just like in a hotel room, and it was like that meme where it was like the guy on the keyboard and the hot girl in front of him, and it's like, baby, pay attention to me. I can't right now, baby. Somebody just posted this, and it was essentially that. And he was just like, she was making fun of him, like. She was like, it's his 40th time watching this fight today. Like, he's on vacation celebrating with his beautiful bombshell of a girl. He's sitting there watching himself KO. Like, make jokes about that if you will, but that's exactly what we're talking about here. And the funny thing is that the only thing, and that's a great stat, by the way, and I've seen it cited that one before as well, and I think I shared it, you sharing that one the last time around, right? But I will say, not only do I agree with your points from that, I think the more important takeaway from that stat, because all stats can be deceiving, especially in this sport, they're almost useless, a lot of them, the ones you see on Fight Metric, no offense. They're just poorly,
the ones that are shown in the broadcast especially.
Oh, it's awful. Those are on it. But even the official ones, like, they completely got the control time wrong from Makwan Amirkhani and, what's his name, Hick Diaz. And that fight's, like, over half a decade old. Like, you guys have had half a decade to fix this stuff. Like, yeah, how much content has been drawn from this well of false numbers, especially the fact they don't talk about leg checks. Anyways, don't get me started. But yeah, the point is, the more interesting thing, the takeaway from that stat, I think, is context. The context for each situation, obviously, right? And the context for this one is, it's the fact that, what's the context of the immediate rematch? This is one that I think many people, it doesn't take a rocket scientist to be like Izzy. Even Izzy's most ardent fans had to have been like, we're going right back in that fast? Not just from a knockout brain rest perspective, right? You want the 6 months to a year at minimum, but also from like a game plan strategy. It's like, maybe take another fight or this or that. And I found it funny.
Get your confidence back.
Yeah, and I found it funny that
especially after a stoppage loss.
Yes, and Alex Pereira analogy, I'll end on this because in the post-fight recap, I was joking with Ryan Wagner going, all this daddy talk from Izzy and John Jones, but Poatan is the real daddy that's kind of coming home. This was also before John Jones made his return. Go easy on me. But the point of Poatan still stands. And it was funny, Poatan's thing this week when he was asked that, why would Izzy want the rematch? And he goes, he compared it, Luca, to a kid that made a mistake and he's dreading for his dad to come home. I can relate to that. And he just says, he's like, you can either run away from it or you can say, all right, let's get the punishment over with. He's like, I think Izzy wants to get a punishment over with. Of course, that's all talk. I just thought that was a funny analogy. That's the last thing I'll say on that.
That is an interesting point that, I didn't want to drag it out, just kind of get, find out one way or another. That is interesting. I just feel like with these immediate rematches where MMA is already a sport where confidence is a huge factor. You are ultimately alone in there in the cage. Yes, you have a team. Yes, you train with that team. Yes, you have cornermen. But ultimately, you're alone in there with thousands of people in an arena and potentially millions at home watching. It's a very isolated sport at the end of the day. And once you get in there and the only other person sharing that cage with you is the person who just put your lights out the last time, that's going to have some level of an effect on a fighter. I don't care who they are. I don't care if they're John Jones. I don't care if they're GSP. I don't care if they're the most mentally tough fighters in MMA history. Even if it doesn't show in their performance, it's going to be in the back of their mind in some way. You saw it last time going back to that Usman fight with Edwards. He looked so hesitant in that third fight. He looked like he was walking through mud. He looked like he was afraid to strike at times. Not to say that single-handedly affected the result, but it absolutely played a factor and certainly hurt his chances. And as we talked about in this breakdown, sure, maybe Izzy can get some takedowns here, but I'm expecting largely a striking or maybe some clinch type of a matchup here. And if you're talking about, say, 25 minutes striking with the guy who already, had that nuke of a left hand, who people were already, making memes about and all this, well, he put you out with it once before, and he proved he can do it again in MMA as well. Because one thing we have to consider in terms of the mental game is going into that last fight, Izzy had so much that he could look at and kind of discredit or discount the first two losses. Not only were they controversial for the reasons we mentioned, but they were years ago, and they were in kickboxing. He could easily tell himself going in, in terms of building confidence internally, well, that was kickboxing, that was years ago, look how much better I am now, I'm the dominant champion, I've never lost in this division. Like, there was so much going for him in terms of confidence in that matchup. That's all been shattered now for this fourth fight. Now he can't sit there and go, I'm a different fighter now, oh, my chin's better, or whatever other things he was telling himself. Now the ultimate truth that he has to face is it's not about his improvement, it's not about being MMA, it's the fact that Alex is just a guy who absolutely can go out there and at any point put the stamp on him and stomp him out of there. And that's something that he has to accept and embrace and ultimately face on Fight Night. And I think that's a bit of a different dynamic than what we got last time, where it seemed kind of, again, we talked about interviews and stuff before, not putting too much weight into them, but it seemed that was kind of his mindset going into the last fight is, yeah, I know I'm 0-2, but he seemed like he was a very solid favorite in his mind going into that fight, where he seemed like, not necessarily he was going to walk over Alex or anything like that, but it seemed like in his mind, it didn't seem like they were the same fighters as when they fought before, whereas now, you can't be saying that. He now has to look at it as, Alex is still a legitimate test. And so I do worry about the confidence. Are we going to get something like, say, what we saw with Usman, where he's going out there and you see some spots where maybe he could be pulling that trigger on the counter. Maybe it could be, a flurry, some aggression from him. And he's just, a little bit hesitant, a little bit gun shy, where he's feinting, but not actually throwing.
Absolutely. Now, we talked a lot about this fight because it's an important fight. We're going to push through the rest of the card a little more prompter. I've got about, 5. I got a nice revolver for you. I got about 5 left in the chamber that I really ran through the comb on. We'll go speed breakdown, if you want to even call it a breakdown for the rest. Co-main event, we got Gilbert Burns Dorhinho minus 450. Jorge Masvidal plus 360. Now, Any takes on this one? It feels like this is one where everyone's on the same page as far as Jorge having one foot out the door. You mentioned the retirement note. Does that play into your analysis here? What do you got, Luca?
Yeah, he seems distracted with all, the Game Bred Fight organization, which is going well for him, of course. He's obviously got the big UFC contract. He seems to be, kind of satisfied in terms of money. It just seems like, in general, he's not the same level of focus that he was a handful of years ago when he was making that run and all. And so I think that's certainly a factor in terms of why, he's a big underdog here. He's also almost 40 years old. He has a ton of wear and tear on him. I'm waiting for him to, start showing some noticeable regression. So I mean, in terms of all the negatives and narratives, it's all going against Jorge here. And so I understand why, he is a big underdog. Also, in terms of the skill and style matchup, Jorge's a guy who cannot fight off of his back foot. We saw that in the Colby fight. We've seen it in the Usman fight. We've seen it in other fights earlier in his career. Whether you're striking, whether you're grappling, you get him to back up, he just isn't effective. He turns into basically a defensive, sort of neutralizing type of fighter where he sits there with the high guard, he waits for you to shoot the takedown, he just basically focuses on defending the takedown, not really countering it, not circling laterally. He backs right up into the cage. He's great at defending the takedown there, but he gets stuck there. This is not just the case at welterweight. You can go back to his fight against Ben Henderson at lightweight. Same deal, loses a controversial decision because he just neutralized him the entire time. So potentially he can do a lot of neutralizing against Burns here, can defend some takedowns, defend some strikes. He is overall the better striker, but the problem is when he's not being able to fight off of his front foot and he's forced to fight off of his back foot, which is probably going to be the case because Gilbert's also going to be trying grappling here, that ultimately will probably shift actually the striking to at least the volume favor Gilbert. So I think probably we're going to see Jorge get out volumed here, maybe even get taken down, but probably not get stopped here. I think he ultimately loses a decision. The big concern I have here for Gilbert and why I would ultimately maybe second guess if you're looking to lay minus 500 on him, doesn't have a great chin or durability. And I know he showed great heart in the Khamzat fight, but aside from that, he really hasn't. You look at his matchups, he gets hurt, he just kind of falls apart. He does not generally show a good ability to fight back from adversity, and he does not show a good chin either. Usman dropped him with jabs, finished him with them. So we could have a matchup here where maybe he's going out there cruising, dominating, wins a clear first round, dropped early in round two. Suddenly it's a totally different dynamic the rest of the bout. So ultimately, I definitely favor Burns in the matchup, but I just can't lay such a steep price on him, all things considered. In terms of plays, potentially maybe look at him to win by decision, just because Jorge is so tough. It's going to be hard to imagine, Burns actually getting the finish on him unless he really is that shot. So I would say maybe Burns by decision, maybe the over, but other than that, I can't really get behind a play on Burns here at such a steep price.
I was initially leaning the same way, both not for a play. If anything, I was looking for a decision angle coming into this one. For all the reasons you said, I'm somebody who defends Jorge Masvidal as far whether I'm picking him or not, and I've cashed a lot of him as an underdog. I actually went to the counter, not just playing online. Went to the counter when he was over 2-1 dog against Darren Till. So I've definitely, I've supported the guy and defended him even when I'm not, talking about his underrated wrestling, his grappling. He hasn't been submitted since Toby Amada got that inverted over in Bellator over a decade ago. Submitted guys like Michael Chiesa early on. But whether it was submitting guys like Chiesa or the fight with Ben Henderson in the clinch where he was like almost having fun doing, scrambly clinch stuff with Ben Henderson when he should have got back to the damage, he's almost too intent on having the fight people want to have. He loves pulling and returning punches because he's so good at it. But when you do that, when you pull and return punches, you like sticking and moving, and you have the attitude of kind of seeing where the fight takes you, well, it mainly takes you to the back of the fence, like Lucas said, where the other fighter wants to have their fight. And it's frustrating because he can pressure and he can game plan with a purpose. We saw that, and I cashed on him there too, by the way, thankfully, when he fought Cowboy Cerrone in Denver. He fought with a purpose. He did the tie marches, the left body kick that my guy Ghost Phantom in the chat is shouting out. I'll throw him on the screen here. What's up, Ghost? Talking about that point. But yeah, he's got those things, and so he can do it. My guy Miguel Class showed a highlight of him, working his clinch and his single collar ties and elbows, and he could. That's where he could really hurt Burns because Burns is going to probably have to fight a lot of this fight in the clinch. It's probably going to look a lot like the Stephen Wonderboy Thompson fight. And you're like, well, Stephen Wonderboy Thompson survived, right? How can Jorge Masvidal not survive? So he comes out and he pressures and grapples like most of them are thinking, raising my hand. That's what I'm thinking here, right? Well, what's the difference? Well, the thing is that don't laugh at me here, but Wonderboy Thompson has a couple black belts in jiu-jitsu, both Japanese and Brazilian jiu-jitsu, was working a lot with Chris Weidman before that camp, was really prepared for that. And even though he is not as impressive or as athletic, even as a late-stage Masvidal, for example, in the wrestling and scrambling, what he does do is actually better against a guy like Burns, where he's much more conservative. He'll lose the round, he'll stay in guard, he'll stay in a bad position, and he's also, even though he'll try to punch back really bad like he did in the Burns fight, but what he will do is he will keep his back religiously glued to the back of the fence, whereas Masvidal, because he's so good, but again, what he will do, and I like this, so I like it. Masvidal's good. He gets away with it, but he turtles to his back. He gives a lot of back exposure. And I know, a lot, you get excited about, Colby Covington, going for the rear nakeds. I didn't get excited for those. I didn't think any of those were close because Colby doesn't really go for those. He kind of just does the threat of a choke to kind of get you in position to throw you back down. He did it to Robbie Lawler. But what was made apparent when you watch what Colby and what George was allowing Colby to do is that, okay, yeah, he might not let him to do it as much there, but there was a neck crank there if you were meaner, right? There was more ground and pound positions there in the Maia fight, which, yeah, you could make a cheeky argument that Masvidal, again, we're having to rewind a half a decade, you can make a cheeky argument that he won from the damage perspective from Criteria. But again, what happened is his back exposure, like I talked about, exposed his back. And yes, he survived against an older Maia who Gilbert Burns wiped out, by the way, right? Not that MMA math always means everything. But what do we know about Maia? And I love Maia, by the way. I'm one of his biggest defenders. But Maia himself says he doesn't like to strike unless he has to. And he doesn't like to be mean about things. Even like the Rick Story neck crank. That was probably the only neck crank you really see from him. If he wanted to crank...
He's on record saying that his preferred way to win a fight is to literally throw no damage and just submit them.
Yes.
Basically, he just wants to be a jiu-jitsu competitor. He's just got ADC.
Absolutely. So even if you're big on Maia, which I am, and even if you want to maybe give Maia a slight edge in that position over Gilbert Burns, despite the MMA math and their head-to-head, I'm fine with that. But there's no way that Maia can be that much better than Burns in that position, to where Burns can't either equal it out and or surpass it with his aggression, his strikes. That Wonderboy Thompson fight, another part of that, besides Thompson being underrated, is that Burns was coming off of 2 losses or something, or a big loss. He really needed to get back on the win streak to protect his ranking. I think that was after the Usman loss. Yeah, absolutely. Like, that was his, and Luca, we've seen this all the time. The fighters have their conservative fight, right? Or they need to get back on track. Directors, they make their quote-unquote safe film, right? M. Night bombed with Unbreakable, so he had to go make a studio film a couple before they trusted him with another fight, right? Fighters have to do this too. And, in fact, when you go and look about that, like, Burns was actually really mad about his wrestling and grappling. He improved it even further for the Chimaev fight. Even though he lost, he did show improvements in that fight to where Chimaev didn't even want to tangle with him. And Burns, and again, you can't listen to fighters all the time, but for what it's worth, Burns has been staying active grappling on the scene, even like didn't he get a victory over Lovato Jr., which is huge, over a huge freaking guy. Actually putting his money where his mouth is, because he said, like Koscheck or these other fighters, they forget about their base at a certain point, and if we're lucky, they smartly revisit their strength, what got them to the dance. And Gilbert Burns said, and has been practicing that, he got Magny out of there, which I know it is not a surprise, for that fight. No offense to Magny, but we've seen that, right? The aforementioned Maia. But again, what does Gilbert Burns say? I know it's an interview, but he puts his money where his mouth is, and he stays consistent with his messaging. He says, I got away from my jiu-jitsu, but not anymore, baby. From here on out, I'm submitting everybody. I've been really following him on YouTube even before I was planning on betting this fight. I've been following him on YouTube, watching his blogs. The guy makes professional choices. He's doing the right thing. He's not leaving town. He's fighting in his backyard, whereas Masvidal's kind of out and about everywhere. I know he didn't necessarily go to Milwaukee for the game-bred boxing, but the point is, he's got a lot going on, right? Like, this just seems like one of those spots where I feel like Burns is gonna get the finish here. Masvidal, I didn't like how he looked against Covington. His counters and stuff, he seemed like just a beat off. I know he's worried about the wrestling, so that kind of trips you up, right? But the timing, which makes sense. Masvidal's been fighting for 20 years. That's a huge load of mileage, right? And he was doing street fights before that, self-admittedly, and training, right? So he's got just so much miles, and I feel like we really saw that. Again, the underrated wrestling was there, but the striking and timing was off, and the gas tank that was already susceptible, right? That looks worse, which is true which is expected, I should say. When fighters get older, their gas tanks get worse. So he's able to defend it for like the first 2 rounds, but by round 3 against Usman first time, round 3 against Colby, that's where he starts surrendering positions. And again, Colby and Maia and Usman aren't exactly, they're punishing, they're brutal, right, in different ways, but not in the same way, whether it's abrupt finishes in transition, opportunistic, or cooking with the purpose. Burns does both. He does those better than those guys in those positions. So I think he can get a finish in round 3, so that's what I actually played. I'll give those numbers. Go ahead, Luca. What were you going to say?
One thing to note about Masvidal, too, is obviously while we were both on the same page about him being potentially regressed at this point, is even in his absolute prime, he is someone who has always had an issue with not necessarily being the better fighter in a fight, but showing that he is the better fighter. I mean, you can go back to his early UFC career. He has a bunch of split decisions. Even before his UFC career, he has some controversial losses, like outside of it. So he's been a guy who historically, you've watched him fight and lose fights. I mean, his Paul Daly fight is a perfect example. This was it in Shark Fights or whatever, some random organization. He basically was the better wrestler there and chose to strike with Daly when all he had to do was get one takedown in the last round and he would have won it easily. And he chose not to and ends up losing a controversial decision as a result. So he's been kind of the king throughout his entire career being in these really close fights. The Ally Quinta one, for example. I mean, he's had so many of these very close split decision matchups. And when you look at those fights, there's a reason for it. It's not a coincidence. He is a great neutralizer. It's kind of like what I talked about before, where when you get him fighting off of his back foot, he will sure try to look for the counter here and there. But generally speaking, it's, again, just that high guard and literally waiting for you to shoot the takedown, waiting for him to just back himself into the cage and then play defense there. And so if we're looking at this matchup now, where it's already not a great stylistic matchup for him, he's already has all the issues we talked about with the age, potential cardio decline, all that kind of stuff. Already, if we're talking about a great matchup for him, there's already the potential he could just blow it with a lack of volume. And so add on that to all the other issues we already mentioned. And again, I totally understand why Gilbert Burns is the favorite here. It's just minus 500, a guy who has a great jab in Masvidal, very quick, very fast, and a guy in Burns who's been knocked down by basically every clean strike he's ever eaten. Can't lay minus 500 on that, but I definitely do favor him to get the job done.
What I did end up laying, though, and this seems pretty big, at least for me, another 1.5 unit play. I was able to find plus money on inside the distance. And again, it could very well go to decision, and that money goes down the hole, right? But for the reasons I said, I feel like Burns gets it. I feel like it's more submission by his own admission. That's what he's going to look for. I think it's going to be, to be exact, it's going to be because George gives it all the time. He thinks his back is kind of against the fence, and he'll give that single leg hook. He won't let him get completely behind their back, but they can still get behind a back enough to where it's like the Conor Khabib finish, right? Where he's just kind of on a corner and he's draped around. He's got the neck crank. That's the exact position I see getting finished, but I don't think Burns will be able to get to it easily. I think it'll take him to round 3. If he gets to it sooner, then he's going to be ultra regressed, even more than we're thinking, right, Luca? So I put 1.5 units plus 100 for Burns inside the distance, and I sprinkled, which you could keep it just to this, so you don't have to, invest like I am here, which is probably smarter, by the way. But round 3 in one house, because it doesn't offer the method. I got that for plus 1,000 at BetMGM. Just a little sprinkle, 0.17U. You know how I like to do with those small ones for the big returns potentially. And BetOnline had a round 3 by subline plus 1,200. You could probably get better if you shop around, but I'm more than happy with plus 1,200. 0.17 units there. So that's what I got on this fight. Anything else before we move on?
No, for me personally, like I said, I'm looking at maybe something with like a Burns by decision flyer, but nothing big. Nice. If I do end up playing it. Like I said, I'm not committed to that at this point, so don't want people to hold me to that. Sure. But definitely, if I play the fight, that's probably the only thing I would be looking at is either Burns by decision or some type of maybe an over, regardless of who wins.
Yeah, if the number gets high enough, maybe I consider hedging, putting something as a hedge there. But kind of like with my Pereira-Adesanya, I'm already more exposed than I would like. The amount that I would have to lay for a fight to go to decision, then it can still go down the hole. If Pereira or more so Adesanya gets a knockout, like no, thank you. I'm exposed enough.
And so some of the things too that you mentioned too for why you're looking at possibly Burns by stoppage. Those are the things that are concerning me right now for why I haven't committed to him by decision. Is that not just the technical things you mentioned, but also just the fact that Jorge was knocked out one punch by Usman, who's not a big power hitter. Let's not, get that twisted here. And also the age, the 1 foot out the door. Usually when fighters lose at the end of their careers, it's not just like they're going out there losing ho-hum decisions. It's usually that they're getting stopped and a lot of times knocked out. And Burns has power. He has aggression. He's going to be going for the finish in all positions here. It really would not surprise me if the notoriously durable Jorge ended up getting hurt here or possibly even knocked out. Let's not forget, he basically gets hurt in like almost every fight, it seems. He always has had incredible recovery, but he does get hurt a ton, even in his absolute prime. And look at a guy like Dan Henderson or Vanderlei Silva. Two guys very similar would get hurt, but would just walk through everything, bounce right back up. Eventually, when their chins got cracked and they actually got put out cold, like Jorge, and this is not only with them, this is a pretty consistent trend throughout MMA history and also boxing and other combat sports. Once those types of guys finally get put out, their chins are just disastrous. And so we haven't really seen yet from Jorge him really get hit with some power shots and that get tested, but I do have some concerns after that Usman knockout loss. Potentially, maybe even a guy like Burns can actually put him out or maybe even hurt him very badly, fall him to the mat, get a submission.
Absolutely. By the way, I heard a beep, and then when you were on your end, I don't know if that was a beep on something on your end, Luca, but then when you were talking, it was kind of like doing a little fuzz. I don't know if you got that, Luca. I don't know if people in the chat. I don't hear it now while I'm talking. Yep, I heard it.
Is it still going?
Hear it whenever you talk. Yeah. And you guys in the chat hear that as well? I'm going to push on while you guys give me feedback on that. Your picture and everything else is crystal clear. I was Adrian Yanez minus 185. Plus 150 comeback on Rob Font. Now, this one is, I feel pretty, decent about a pick here, but I have I'm really kind of reserved to play. There may be something I throw in a round robin here if I don't find anything better, and I'll give you guys that in a second. Not hearing any fuzz from Kyle Johnson. Okay, cool. Let me know if you hear any fuzz when my guy Luca talks, so I'll throw it back here in a second. But, basically, I was looking at Yanez by KO maybe for a round robin, but it's not something I want to play. The number's not sexy enough for what I think it should be for a guy like Rob Font. My heart is with Rob Font and his team. I'm a big fan of Rob Font and his team. But when I look at a Rob Font fight, just like without the Aldo fight, why I picked Aldo by decision, you go back and read that breakdown. That's one of the few breakdowns where even I'll be like, give myself a pat on the back. Like that was a good one, Dan, because I look at a fighter, can he counter the jab when you fight a jab-heavy fighter? Just basic kind of puzzle piece fittings right there, right? And Aldo obviously is hardwired to counter jabs. That's why I picked him against Moicano, and so forth, right? So that's kind of something I'll look for in Rob Font. Now, Yanez, he counters the jab beautifully. He can even counter southpaw jabs. Not just so much countering jabs, countering straight shots. Obviously, he can counter kicks too. We saw that in the Tony Kelly fight. Perhaps Tony Kelly saw what I'm talking about because Tony Kelly, even though he is shifting offense and throws a lot of heavy kicks normally, he really specifically avoided throwing jabs or starting with the jab because he didn't want to get countered. I know a lot of people will go back and point to the Randy Costa fight where Randy Costa busted Yanez up with the jab and busted his nose up in the first round. And I'm like, well, that kind of throws you off there. Well, that's a weird caveat, right? That's, I don't know if it's how early of a pandemic a fight that is, but even though they don't talk about it really on the broadcast until the next fight, that's right around when Adrian Yanez is going through a major shift. He lost his coach, RIP Saul Solis. Luca, you've seen it a bunch. I saw it when Tompkins was branching out down here at Extreme Couture, right? The Team Tompkins guys, they went on a huge drought, right? We saw it with, not to bring more commiserations, Extreme Couture, Robert Follis. We saw it happen, with Brian Caraway, Misha, some other fighters, right? Kevin Lee. They went on downtrends when their coaches, when they lose their coach, quite literally lose their coach, right? That's a big deal. So I do try to cut. I know that's intangible city right there, but I think that's a legitimate one. We do got to cut the fighter some slack on. And Randy Costa is a house on fire for anybody in round one. That's the thing. You've got to survive round one with Randy Costa. Also, Randy Costa did a good job of technically mixing in straight shots to get Yanez to slip, then throwing big kicks, then going back to those straight shots. So it took Yanez a little bit to adjust, but once Yanez adjusts, he actually started out jabbing with Costa there. And again, Davey Grant, you don't see the jab counters that much because Davey Grant, similar to Tony Kelly, is a wild man. He comes at you with shifting, wild, swinging hooks and combinations. It's straight shots that you don't want to throw against Yanez. And what does Rob Font do? Well, what's one of his strong points? It's straight shots. So I hate to just leave it at that, but I'm picking Yanez here. The question to me is, does he get a finish or not? And one thing I do want to say before I throw it to you, Luca, for your technical breakdown, but this is one thing I take as far as intangible city in interviews, is whenever a fighter, for example, has a surgery, like I remember Jessica Penne, when she made, I think she was coming back at UFC 199, and her fight before that wasn't from Jędrzejczyk to getting her nose busted. She had the surgery, right? Josh Koscheck, when he gets his orbital busted, right? The classic example. What happens to these fighters? Not only do you see downtrends in an overall perspective after those points, but when they get hit to those areas, they get inside, they check whether it's a clean shot. Especially noses is a big one, but faces in general. Now, Rob Font in an interview, and I go, again, you never trust what the fighters say in interviews and this and that. I get it. But Rob Font in an interview is being very genuine. He just had a kid. So did Yanez. They're coming. That makes fighters come down to earth. It can make them better. It can make them go through a weird adjusting period too. But what Font was saying was he was talking about the feeling he got in the Chito Vera fight, where he said the first shot Chito hit him with and dropped him with, it felt like he broke his face, and he never felt that before, and it panicked him. It freaked him out, and he never wants to feel that again. And he said it in such a real way, where it's almost too real. It almost feels like he can be brought back to that headspace, if you know what I'm saying. So I'm almost worried here. I know he didn't get a surgery. He didn't maybe get a broken orbital per se, but he got real messed up, Luca. Is it one of those things where maybe Yanez doesn't even have to finish him? Maybe he just hits him with the first counter, and that's all it takes to get in Rob Font's head. What do you think about this fight?
Well, that's really kind of been the story of Rob Font's career so far, is his lack of ability to take damage. I actually call him Rob Font Runner because he is the worst front runner in the entire UFC right now. And I don't say that like, oh, I'm a Rob Font hater.
Right.
It's fun to do that. I say that like it hurts me to say that because he's so incredibly talented. Like, look at the Chito Vera fight. Like, these are performances where you talk about him setting records in that despite losing because he just can't face any kind of adversity. So when you're analyzing Rob Font's skill sets, his fundamentals, like, he's fantastic. He has a great striking arsenal, a great jab, great volume, not so powerful, but he has some pop, enough that he can, make opponents respect his hands. It's not just like some of these guys who seem like, they're throwing pillows out there and their opponents just walk right through him. He'll make his opponents actually respect them. He has overall competent grappling, even though he can be a bit, defensively poor, so when he's put on his back, but it's not like he's, a total fish out of water there. I mean, this is a guy who should be a very, very high level, upper echelon type of fighter. Maybe not a champion, because obviously, it's a tough division, but it's not a situation where he should be losing to some of the guys that he's been losing to, especially when he's been able to have some of the success that he's having. But at the end of the day, it's a matchup where it comes down to the fact that he just cannot battle back from adversity at all. I mean, you literally see the look on this man's face when he takes the first good shot of a fight. His entire complexion changes. Like, he looks like he's seen a ghost, and then he starts fighting in a completely different manner. He starts shelling up. He starts retreating. Go back and look at the John Lineker fight, for example. Lineker, I think, scored officially a couple of knockdowns there. There were no real knockdowns. Font would get hurt or get hit, and then he would just kind of back up into the cage and then just kind of turtle up and cover up and then go into survival mode. It was like Brock Lesnar against Shane Carwin. He didn't get knocked down there. He got hit with some shots up against the fence and then just kind of decided to turtle up and go down. He wasn't actually dropped. There is a difference. And when you see Rob Font go out there, be dominating fights, but basically can't get hit by one clean shot or he's going to lose, how's he going to beat higher level opposition out there? And so looking at this matchup, Yanez, do I think he's the better overall fighter? Absolutely not. I think Rob Font technically is a superior fighter, and I think that's pretty objective. However, Adrian can take more damage. He has more power. He's a bit faster. He's younger. He has more left in the tank. And we've seen that he can actually battle back from at least some adversity. And we've seen that Font cannot battle back from literally any at all. And so this could be a situation like the Chito fight where he's going out there, maybe wins a 10-8 first round, looks like an absolute stud, looks like he's having one of the best performances of his entire career, the most dominant performance of the night, eats one stiff jab in the first 60 seconds of round two, and it's a different fight altogether, kind of like the Gilbert Burns fight that I mentioned earlier, but to a much, much worse degree. And so this is a matchup where I feel like people can kind of get trapped looking at the skill matchup and go, okay, clearly Font is a better skilled fighter, but I just can't get over the fact this is probably going to be a striking matchup and he has to go 15 minutes without taking a good shot in order to win. I don't think that's going to happen. So I think Adrian Yanez probably struggles a bit early on, eats some volume, but eventually finds a good shot. And even if it doesn't put Font down, even if it doesn't put him out, might just, back him up momentarily, it's probably going to change the entire dynamic of the fight.
Yeah, if I didn't like Font so much and Yanez's price maybe trended down, which I hoped it would, more toward the minus 150, which for me is more the playable chalk range for me for straight plays and my budget, Luca. But but yeah, no, I don't think I'll get there. But I agree with everything you said. And the common thread when you look at Font's losses, it's fighters who either pressure and or counter. And more often, it's the countering is the common theme, whether it's the pressuring guys like Lineker who can counter as well. And so can Yanez, by the way. He can pressure and counter. He's a little bit like the George Masvidal comparison that gets abused on him. He will kind of stick and move at range because he loves to feel things out and kind of make reads in that first round. Which is something to note. But again, it's counter fighters here. I suspect Font might try to change things up and wrestle more. He's very underrated there. Like we saw, and I called for, by the way, in the Ricky Simone fight. But unless Yanez really shows a hole there that we haven't seen, the little bits of transition and stuff that I've seen him work, and the people that he works with, I really like his eyes in exchanges. He can really see things, not just for counters, but as far as counter wrestling, where he gets his whizzers, his grip fighting, things like that. So I like him in this fight here, and maybe he could be a quiet parlay piece because he still doesn't come at a high cost. And if you are feeling bullish on him, maybe that's more of a quiet parlay piece. And you don't have to be as heavily invested in the minus 500s of the card. That's always nice when you don't have to expose yourself there on those fronts. But anything else to add to this one?
In terms of a betting perspective, it's a tricky one for the reasons we outlined. I'm in the same boat as you, where if the price on Adrian were to drop down a little bit, then potentially you get into range. But right now, just a little bit too high for my liking. I do think that potentially this is one that, even if the line does drop on him, you probably want to just look at live betting anyways. For example, Font versus Cheeto, I was very adamant in my podcast, like, do not bet Vera pre-fight. Wait for him to lose the first round. Bet him after that. You'll get him at a nice underdog price. You'd even bet Font pre-fight as the, get free, set up like a free money situation if you want. But ultimately, I was on Cheeto there in live betting. That ultimately came to fruition, and so it turned out well. This is a similar situation here where is it possible that Font just doesn't get it going right out of the gate, maybe takes a big shot early on, maybe just loses right from the get-go? Sure, of course, but we're talking about playing the percentages here, and we're talking about what's more likely in terms of at that 50% threshold. Do I think it's 50%, like more than 50% likely that Font at least has some success early on? Yes, I do. So how much success he has will depend, obviously. But if we have a close first round, you're not going to see a worse price on Adrian. If we see a round that Font wins, you're going to see definitely a better price on Adrian. And obviously, if Adrian wins the first round, you can get a worse price. But my point is I think it's probably worth waiting and seeing if you get the outside shot at Font, winning the first round. Or maybe it's not the first round. Maybe it's the first 3 minutes, and then you live bet Adrian, the 3.5 minute mark. There's a lot of different ways you could potentially capitalize on a Font fight when you basically know that he's going to start out strong. It's much like the opposite of Cheeto Vera, where I always talk about if you're going to bet on him, wait to bet him live after the round one or round two, because he's going to lose the first 1 or 2 rounds like every single fight in his career pretty much. And if you're going to bet against him, then obviously do the reverse. So when it comes to Font, I think live betting is definitely something that's a heavy consideration for any fight of his, this one included.
I agree. They're getting better at the live lines, but this one might be, he's more of a sneaky.
Are they?
Some of them, like the obvious ones, like the Makwan Amirkhanis and the Daniel Lacerda da Silva. You had the exact scenarios you were looking for, and I didn't see it, but apparently they were like still, only posting like plus 100 for CJ Vergara or something, and then still keeping the guy who fought Makwan a favorite going into round 2, Jack Shore, because they just knew they knew where it was going to go. And I noticed some round props on the more obvious guys, they've been not giving as juicy numbers. But to your point, I don't think they're quite on to, Rob Font's not a more obvious guy for that, but I agree with your points as far as looking for that angle. So to Luca's point, something to look out for there. Real quick, to listeners in the future and to Luca, everybody's saying you sound fine. So listeners in the future, if you're hearing it for some reason, I apologize, but from everybody in the chat, it's just me. So I will suffer through. You sound and look fine, Luca. We'll go to the next fight. I'm midway through the comb on this one. So Luca, I will lean on you. Kevin Holland minus 250. Santiago Ponzinibbio plus 200. Value on Pons, tempting or not? I know you already kind of tipped your hand on some of the pawn stuff. I'm leaning toward Holland by KO. That doesn't mean I'm going to pick that, folks. I could end up the other side. Maybe the leg kicks and takedowns sway me on Ponzinibbio. What are your reads here, Luca?
I mean, in the case of Ponzinibbio, I think it's a very likely thing now that he's at least significantly regressed, if not borderline shot. Going into his last fight against Morano, he had already been on a bit of a skid. He's not looked great in recent performances. And essentially, my read going into that fight was, as long as he's not completely shot, this is a great spot for him, a good stylistic matchup, Morano on short notice and all that as well. So unless, again, he's basically a complete shot fighter, he should go out there and win this. And
Right.
He ultimately gets the knockout with a couple of minutes left in the fight. Until that happened, I was fully expecting to lose that bet literally the entire way. Even when he was having success in that fight, I was just like, Jesus Christ, this is a disastrous performance. The fact
Right.
that he managed to pull it out, like, I feel so lucky. It's like a miracle, I feel like, from a betting perspective. I just did not think that was a good performance. And again, that was a stylistically great matchup for him. And he's already had some other bad performances recently as well. Speaking of those guys who, get rocked a lot but don't get put out, he was one of them. And then he got put out by Lee. And since then, he's not been put out again, but he has not looked good in his performances. Even his win, he just has looked kind of bad, to be honest. And so at this point, I feel like he's going to look just as bad, if not worse, than we've seen in those recent performances. I think he's trending down. He's up there in age, a lot of damage. Like I said, recently put out. Tons of fights under his belt at this point. So I think that's all going against him here. And then on top of that, his defensive style. He doesn't really block with his hands almost at all, and he doesn't really move his head laterally. His entire defense pretty much relies on just moving his head straight back. Just straight back. And not even that much. Maybe like 6 inches, 8 inches, maybe as much as a foot. It's really not enough, and that's why he gets caught a lot. You'll actually see in a lot of his fights where he's trying to kind of lean back and will get caught with straight shots or jabs right on the tip of his chin or on the nose. Well, what does Holland do best? He throws very long, very straight punches. He obviously has a very long reach. He's tall. That's one thing that Ponzi usually has over his opponents. He's bigger, longer, rangier. Not the case here. So stylistically on the feet, it's not to say that Ponzi couldn't get his pressure game going, because he does very good work when he's the one pressuring, and Holland will willingly back himself up into the cage. Obviously, Holland has very poor takedown defense as well, but Ponzi, if he can get the pressure game going, like you mentioned, maybe mix in some takedowns, maybe get Colin with his back up against the cage, get those flurries going, sure, he can have some success. But again, talking about a game of percentages, what's more likely? Probably a striking matchup at range, which is almost all of Ponzinibbio's fights, unless he's being tried to get taken out by his opponents. So probably get a striking matchup at range, and in that case, Holland has at this point a much better chin, probably more one-punch power as well, longer reach, probably a bit faster too, better defense. So ultimately, I do think this is a win that or a fight that is trending towards a win towards Kevin Holland, probably even by stoppage. I think there's a real shot at that. The thing for me, though, is Holland is the guy who just perennially does not fight smart in the cage. Whether you're talking about wins or losses, this guy pretty much always will have some moment of just terrible fight IQ or bonehead strategy, or just something that makes you sit there and go, like, you're a professional fighter? Like, how are you not more prepared than this? And so against a dangerous opponent like a Ponzinibbio, on one hand, I want to go, oh, hey, he doesn't have to worry about the grappling. He should really be able to get the striking going. But does he really not have to worry about the grappling? I could still see him ending up on his back by something stupid here, getting out of hand, doing something silly, just his general poor fight IQ that just terrifies me when you're talking about laying any kind of steep juice on a fighter. I mean, fight IQ is significantly important. So if he's a decent underdog, maybe you have a little more leeway with that. But when you're talking about a sport and where you're basically who makes the less mistakes is ultimately who wins more often than not, you don't want to be laying minus 200, minus 300 on a guy who makes a lot of mistakes, win or lose.
Absolutely. That's why Kevin Holland's a guy that I was always looking to fade since he got to welterweight. Not because I actually like Kevin Holland, Luca, but you know what I'm talking about. Since, the lines have finally come down to earth, and I'm saying come down to earth, and he's still a big, minus 250 favorite, a moderate favorite at the very least, right? But the guy was getting minus 400, minus 450 lines at minimum when he came down. And yes, I picked him to win those matchups, like Alex Oliveira or Tim Means. But just for value's purpose, like I couldn't disagree with anybody taking shots on the other side, because the time was coming with the fighter, to your point, that makes those mistakes. But he has such underrated, proprioception, a word I use a lot with Poatan Pajeda. Kevin Holland actually has a bit underrated that himself. Like, he doesn't check kicks, which is why I mentioned the leg kicks. He doesn't defend takedowns that well. But as far as placing that right hand, As far as placing that right hand and finding it in space, finding opportunities in space and capitalizing, that's what I see. I see that opportunistic right hand. And I actually see Ponzinibbio, because MMA would be like this. It's a cruel bitch, right? Where Ponzinibbio will actually come out. And I agree, even though I scored the Jeff Neal fight ever so slightly for him and thought he had an argument against Pereira, even though I scored it for Pereira despite picking and playing Pons. I felt he had an argument for those decisions, but I agree he didn't look great. But how poetic would it be that he comes out, looks great, looks like he's going to be winning, on his way cruising to a decision, upset, can't believe it. You're ready to tear up your Holland tickets, and then Holland's going to land a random knockout punch. That's kind of how I see this fight in my head. Check my quick picks and prognostications article. I could change my mind, folks, but that's where I'm leaning. Any last words, Luca, on this matchup?
Ponzi was doing well against Lee too before the knockout. Like I could easily see it being a very similar thing. And I think Holland's fight against Buckley, that specific type of shot that knocked him out, is very much what I see could potentially be the one that does it for Ponzi. Because Ponzi will oftentimes find himself where he's just outside of his own boxing range. And again, the opponent throws a strike at him and he just moves his head straight back. He's assuming he's out of range, and he still gets hit all the time in that situation. And that's not by guys who are 6'3" with the 80-ish reach that Holland has. So I see it kind of being like that Buckley situation where he's kind of out just outside of his own punching range, just kind of slightly moving his head side to side, but not using, actual head movement. And then out of nowhere, just a big right hand or something lands and snaps his head back, puts him down. So those types of situations, maybe even if it doesn't knock him out, I think that he's going to get hit a lot and tagged a lot with those kind of that kind of dynamic at play here. I think that the range advantage that Holland has, even though he's not a great guy at actually utilizing his range advantage in fights, just the fact that he still does have such a long reach and throws those great straight punches, and Ponzi's so used to having the size and reach advantage himself, I think those ultimately will end up being the Achilles heel here for Ponzi.
Yep. I don't disagree with any of that. All right, last fight of the main card. We'll try to speed through these ones, especially this one. I don't think we have too much to say. It's kind of a gimmick fight, right? It could be an awful fight, but kind of like we'll talk about that. Well, we won't talk too much about Carl Williams and the Pleasure Man, I believe it was, or whatever. But like that fight, I was at that Vegas fight or whatever, where it was like, how did that get fight of the night? It's because Dana loves being right to where a Contender Series fighter will win, even if they're not good, even if they actually were a fighter on the Contender Series and he didn't sign. If they get a win and they're in the Contender Series, Dana White will go to social media and go, "I told you, if you know, you know," and then he'll give them the bonus, even though there's like 10 other like more deserving people on the card. So I'm just letting you know that's what we're in store for. Raul Rosas Jr. minus 250, Christian Rodriguez plus 200. I'll probably end up picking Rosas by decision to replicate another grappling pressure win. Like JSP, I hate calling him by that name, but I can't think of it. Jonathan Pierce did. But what are your thoughts on this matchup, Luca?
Yeah, I haven't researched it too much. I did do a little bit, but this is the type of matchup that's not great from a betting perspective. You have a hyped prospect going against a guy who, on paper, he should beat. Stylistically, he's a grappler, obviously. Talking about Ruel here. And then he's going against a guy who, well, he is certainly a better striker than Ruel. I mean, no question about that. And I don't expect Ruel's striking to improve that much yet. The grappling is just not there for Rodriguez. He doesn't have a good takedown defense. He can survive on the mat, but the takedown defense is porous. And so it seems pretty obvious that they're giving this matchup here for that reason. They want to go out there, get the takedowns, hopefully get the submission. I'm not sure if that happens. Maybe Rodriguez can be a little bit tough, maybe drag it deep. Maybe he's able to last to a decision, but I mean, ultimately, it is kind of one of those kind of ABC matchups. You look at it and just go, okay, this is pretty straightforward in terms of the absolutely porous takedown defense from one fighter. And not that I think the other is, any kind of stud grappler or wrestler. And certainly his grappling has looked good so far, but who's he faced? Let's be honest here. So it's just more of a case that we've seen historically, time and time again, the poor takedown defense. That's why this matchup's being made. The UFC will probably be right in that, but in terms of the prospect potential going forward for the Antonio Inoki lookalike here, I'm not exactly sure that I think all that highly of him. I mean, the UFC is trying to obviously push him because he's young, but I mean, obviously you've been analyzing prospects a long time as well. Outside of him just being young, what really is noteworthy here?
Right, and Luca, you've been around for a while, and arguably longer. Obviously, probably longer actually. I'm a tough noob, but the point is, we've seen that reversed where you can get there too early, and that's actually bad, right? Like, that's
And
actually
the UFC will
bad.
constantly push fighters too early. I mean, like John Jones, they basically saw what happened there and went, okay, that's how we handle prospects now. And ever since then, they just treat every prospect like John Jones, where
Yeah.
they go out there, they face like a guy who's 0-2 in the UFC or a guy who's 1-2 and gets cut right after. Like these types of fighters, and all of a sudden they're like, oh yeah, here's a top 7 guy who's like a stylistic nightmare for you. Go be John Jones and do what he did against Shogun and, go out and shock the world and become the next GOAT. It's like, John Jones is the GOAT for a reason.
Yeah, he's an outlier.
Yeah, that's who does that. The GOAT, not a Paige Van Zandt, Sage Northcutt, or in this case, Rua. Like, they have to get, like, I don't know what they're doing with the prospects, but if they want to actually start building prospects normally and not just basically getting lucky on like who actually turns out, because like literally go back and look at the UFC's stars and their prospects and who they hype. Their stars, their champions are almost never the fighters who they chose to hype on their own.
Nope.
They're almost always guys who like they put against their hype trains who happen to beat them. Like Rosas Jr, one of the most popular fighters in that division, she was put in against Paige to lose to her.
Yes.
That's why they made that fight. She was a 2-1 underdog. I bet the
Absolutely.
house on Rose there. But like they were trying to make her lose and basically be like, the hell with you. You have multiple losses. We don't care about you. She goes out there, gets a dominant win, and then they're like, okay, I guess maybe you're the one we should hype. Like that's usually how it goes with the UFC. They pick someone to hype. They do a terrible job managing their career. They do a terrible job choosing that person. There was no reason to ever believe Paige Van Zandt was ever going to be a high-level fighter. She'd been training for 5 years going into that Rose fight, and there's literally training footage, like on I think it was UFC Embedded or some UFC like official program, where she's literally training with her coach and doesn't know how to apply a rear naked choke. Like he's having to walk her through like the basic figure 4 hand structure of a rear naked choke, and it's like you're fighting Rose Namajunas as a -250 favorite. And the UFC willingly put you in this spot. Like, they weren't aware of this is what's going on in your training. Like, maybe they weren't. But if so, that's on the UFC for not being more aware. So my point is a lot of times people trust in the UFC of, oh, this is a gimme fight. Oh, this is a made-for-be a squash match. Or this is a setup fight. Most times, well, I shouldn't say most times, but a lot of times those setup fights go very poorly. Most times they work out in the very early days, when they're facing, again, like the 0-2 type guys in the UFC, or even, a Rodriguez type level opponent. But when they take that step up, most times it doesn't actually go well for the prospect.
Yeah, no, absolutely. They've never been good at it, particularly Dana. And now they're not even in the business in developing prospects. Shout out to MMA. That's a whole nother conversation, right? But it breaks down simply like this.
Francis Ngannou, he's a recent example.
Yeah,
he was supposed to lose to Curtis Blades. They were trying to build up Curtis Blades. Both of their fights. He was
times.
An underdog, like a 3-1 underdog, both times. Both times it's supposed to be just get Ngannou out of here and make Blades the new guy. And then obviously Ngannou goes on to be the champion. So I mean, this has just always been the case for the UFC outside of basically John Jones.
Well, this doesn't apply to Blades per se, but most of the times it breaks down to two things. They're either one of two, if not both. They're either bad talents or bad people. And when they get lucky and they provide good talents like the John Jones or whatever, like, they're usually not like the best people. And that's something else that Dana loved in the day.
Or just from like, you can just tell they're not like a true professional athlete type. Like, I know I always harp on Paige and stuff, but it's like she's just such the perfect example of the UFC's fraudulent prospects. Like, I remember talking to my friends in MMA media, and I remember one of them specifically was like, I don't think Paige Van Zandt could talk about fighting for 10 minutes. I don't think she could even talk about stickers for 10 minutes. Like, there's just, you talk to some fighters and they have like, you talk to John Jones, he can go in depth about skill set and like all about what's going into a fighter. And then you talk about some people and you talk about Paige and she's just kind of like, yeah, fighting is really cool and I'm really enjoying it. Like, it's just not the same as like a John Jones or even like a Max Holloway or some of these guys who have that really in-depth, like they live and breathe fighting.
Absolutely. Chatters, I appreciate you guys. So active today. It's so hard to get to everybody, and the show's already going kind of long, so I want to be respectful of time. I've been trying to get you guys on the screen where I can. I'll try to double back around maybe for a very quick sweep, but we're going to push quickly through the rest of these fights. There's only about 2 more that I have opinions and bets on. We'll see what Luca has, but one of them is the next one leading into the pay-per-view. It's a middleweight fight, but it is a good one in their defense. We got Kelvin Gastelum -125. I believe he opened as as the favorite, and the line has flipped, but now it's coming back more toward the even. We got Chris Curtis still in the comeback, though. Can be had at +105. Obviously, I've got some extreme couture bias here, even though I'm not like super tight with Chris or anything like that. I try to stay professional, of course, but I got to state the biases, whether they play a factor or not. That being said, I actually ran this fight through the tape. Like I said off the top of the show, I watched it way back, and I went back to watch Kelvin Gastelum's southpaw performances, and I believe he is 3-on-3. I'll pull up a tally here as I kick it back to Luca. But I ended up going with Chris Curtis. Now, it's not a crazy take it to the bank, even though I played him plus 110 for a unit. I think it's going to be a competitive decision where Chris Curtis can win it and still lose it because he likes to go to the body and he likes to counter. And we know how judges love rewarding that shit, right? Whereas Gastelum, he's not exactly a round winner either, but he is a more optically friendly fighter as far as volume, which has diminished over the years. Hasn't been as successful, certainly, with his accuracy over recent years, but optically, we know you don't have to land. Just watch any Macy Barber fight, pretty much, minus their strikes in the clinch. You don't have to land clean, and even though he can't hold people down, I don't expect him to get takedowns or to hold Chris Curtis down. The fact is, you mix in a bunch of takedowns, again, optics could be in his side here. Could be setting myself up for heartbreak, but I'd rather be on the plus money side if I am going to play the thing. Do you have any feelings on this fight, Luca?
Yeah, when I look at this one, that just screams to me close, controversial decision. Both of them have been in some close decisions in the past, especially Gastelum. He has a bunch of controversial ones. And not only that, you look at Gastelum's career. So over his last handful of years, he's not been on the best skid. He's actually 1-5 over his last 6. But who he's lost to is Jared Cannonier, Robert Whittaker, Jack Hermanson, Darren Till, and Israel Adesanya. In those fights, for example, against Israel, that was a split decision loss, which he did very well, or excuse me, unanimous decision loss, which he did very well for himself. It was an extremely close decision despite that. The fight against Darren Till, that was a split decision, extremely close. The fight against Jack Hermanson, he just kind of made a mistake, got heel hooked right out of the gate. But then the fight against Robert Whittaker, kind of a bad stylistic matchup for him. And don't get me wrong, it's not like he was super competitive there, but it's not like he got blown out of the water and looked like a shot fighter. His chin held up fine. He had some moments there. Then his last fight against Jared Cannonier, kind of the same deal, where it's not like he's going out there and just getting, stomped into oblivion. And even look at some of his finish losses. For example, Chris Weidman, obviously he ended up choking him out in the 3rd round. But before that, he almost knocks out Chris. I think it was at the end of the 1st round there. So my point is, if you look at Gastelum's career, if you go back to his Neil Magny loss, I mean, there's so many of these fights where win or lose, he's just in very close fights. He's not often in dominant performances. And even when he is in a fight that ends dominantly one way or the other, it's usually, like I mentioned, kind of like the Jack Hermanson fight, where he just makes a mistake and gets heel hooked, or his opponent makes a mistake and just gets knocked out right away. But generally speaking, when he's going against other good, higher-level fighters, he's in super close fights. Go back to Tyron Woodley, a guy who's very low volume himself. You'd think that the volume by Gastelum there should massively outweigh that. Split decision again. So it might have been actually a majority decision, but regardless, something very close like that. So that's what I look at with terms of his career. It's just he's never in a fight pretty much that's dominant. It's usually a close one. We know how bad judges are, and we know also how durable both of these two fighters are. Both of them have power at times. They both had some finishes, but generally speaking, they're not like big one-hitter quitter types of guys. So we're probably not going to see a knockout here. We're probably going to see a decision. It's probably going to be close in volume. I feel like it's going to be one of those fights where you go to the scorecards and maybe we have an opinion, maybe we don't, but either way, we're going to be going, see what the judges say here. Like, I don't have any faith in them to get it right, wrong, or whatever way. So a fight like that, two durable guys, probably not going to finish, reeks close, possibly controversial decision. Looking at the over here potentially, or maybe if fight goes the distance, it's a little bit under 2-1. Shout out to the Combat Chronicles guy, or Chronic Combat guys. We talked about that earlier this week. Potentially the over there or the inside the distance. Now, interestingly, in those types of spots, usually the lines will be relatively close, but you're actually getting a pretty significant reduction in juice if you take that extra 2.5 minutes for the over, or for the inside the distance. Over is like minus 250, 260, and then if you want to just wait out the extra 2.5 minutes, you're getting all the way down to minus 190, which is a pretty significant difference. So if I end up playing that, I will probably go with or fight to go the distance rather than the over. I will take the extra 2 minutes and 30 seconds to sweat out, but take a big reduction in juice there. So if I end up playing it, which again, not committing to yet, I will have my final plays in my Patreon content later in the week. But if I end up playing this fight, it's probably going to be that. I just feel like it's going to be a controversial decision either way.
Yeah, if you can incorporate that into your plays, it should cash. I'm getting unfortunately, even more inflated numbers than that. So it's turning me off personally, but that should definitely
It
be
might
an
have
angle.
moved since then too. Check.
I also have like the worst lines of the houses that I play, so don't let that fool you. Believe me, me having bad lines is normal. So, but if you could find it under that too, I agree. I would much rather take that discount as well. Real quick, so Gastelum is officially and I'll get the Southpaw report out tomorrow. I'll tweet it out. He's officially 2-1-1 against UFC level Southpaws. He obviously should be 3-1, but that no contest was a positive marijuana test for when he beat Vitor Belfort. So between the marijuana tests that shouldn't count to no contest hit to the fact that he was putting an old dog out to slaughter, it's really hard to count that fight either way, good or bad, right? You kind of just forget about it. But you go back early in his career, the first Southpaw he encounters is Rick Story, who, Rick Story actually, he didn't have John Crouch in his fight for this fight, and it shows. He comes out with a really bad game plan. He actually comes out orthodox, which he never does, and he gets tagged up bad and pretty much just gives the first round to Gastelum. But he's finding his way back by the end of the first round to where by the time the second round comes, Gastelum's still doing better and probably winning more parts of the round. But Rick Story lands really hard shots to the body throughout, counters him, and actually rocks him with classic southpaw counters right toward the end. It's actually a competitive fight. No problem with it going into Gastelum, but there were things there, right? Next southpaw he fights is not till Johnny Hendricks. I was at that fight live at UFC 200. This was the last time Hendricks would make welterweight. Of course, he had a rough cut like he always did through that whole last stretch of his career. And, Johnny Hendricks wasn't, throwing as much or as confidently. So it's hard to, how much do you take from that? Whereas Gastelum, he is arguably in his, kind of prime stretches the best we've ever seen him, right? So there's kind of two things there. Gastelum's still at, 170 at this point, right? And in that fight, Gastelum's using his lead hand a little more. Again, numbers and lead hand savvy has been kind of real hit and miss with Kelvin. There hasn't been a lot of maturation since that you would like to see. And Hendricks, as he tends to do, he actually does really decent against other southpaws like he did with Lawler, right? He's actually throwing, his arsenal opens up even this stage of Hendricks. Even this stage of Hendricks is hitting uppercuts, shovel hooks, bodies, and south does, mind you. I know it's a fight from a while ago. Again, Vitor Belfort's his next southpaw, beats him, loses to Darren Till, which is, I don't have an issue with that, but that's just a weird fight. Kind of beats him, in the clinch. Again, counter savvy, more savvier striker. Ends up kind of having his fight with him and can't really change it with the takedown dynamic or any other dynamic. Since then, he hasn't faced a southpaw, but here's where it gets interesting, right? Last fight, Jared Cannonier. Fight ready. I have a ton of respect for them. Leg kicks and wrestling is usually the main improvements. And you listen, again, I know it's just interviews, but I do like hearing the Chris Curtis in interviews. I already know his team. He's got a great team behind him who does good homework anyways. But even Chris himself said, oh yeah, he's probably going to look to hit my leg and stuff because Chris knows where his weakness is, And I'm not just saying this because it's Chris Curtis or he comes from my gym. I would say it anyways. And so it was good to hear Curtis say this himself where, guys, I took a fight on short notice and traveled across the pond against Jack Hermanson. I had a bad fight. That happens. Relax, right? And since then, he's won a fight, and it was against the southpaw, right? His only southpaw versus southpaw match, which is Joaquin Buckley. And Joaquin, had some moments for sure, but I really liked what I saw from Curtis as far as his counters. And again, if it goes the distance, we're still running into the optics of a close fight. But after running through the tape, I don't know, man. I don't know where Gastelum's at in his career. He's got a long layoff. He's had multiple injuries that he's coming back from. There's just too many flags for me to get excited for him. I'm surprised people are really... I'm both surprised people are betting him, but I'm also surprised people aren't betting him more because he's the more named guy. I'll just take the plus money at 1 unit and let it ride. Chris Curtis.
One thing I want to add, too, about the potential for a close decision here is if you look at Gastelum's success in fights, he's a very underrated counterboxer in the pocket. That's generally where most of his success in the striking actually comes from, especially when he gets finishes. You look at when he knocked out Michael Bisping, counter in the pocket, slick little head movement, gets the overhead over the top. Same thing for, say, win against Tim Kennedy. Nice little head movement in the pocket, slick counterboxing, gets the TKO. So if you look at historically his greatest success, it does come in the pocket with those types of exchanges that are hard for the dumbass judges to properly gauge. And just put it bluntly, that's those types of situations, they mess up a lot. And if Kevin Gastelum is basically his only way to have success in this fight or most fights is those pocket exchanges, that's one of the reasons why you always see him in those close types of decisions, because he may be in a situation where he avoids their strikes. They throw 2, 3 strikes, he avoids them, he tags them with one good one. Depending on the angle of the judge where they're sitting cage side, they might not be able to tell. Even if they have a good angle, they might just be ignorant and not be able to tell. I've watched fights live at the Apex where I'm sure you've been there. You can get just about as close to basically where the judges are sitting.
Yeah.
And it is absolutely compared to watching on TV, it's like almost a different sport that you're watching. It's so much harder. Yeah, so in some cases I don't fault judges for certain types of fights.
Absolutely, yeah.
Yeah, where I'll just be like, this is just like a close fight, you got to throw your arms up. But then there are the situations where they get it wrong, and sometimes that will be a situation like Gastelum where they can't quite tell who's getting the better of it.
I agree with you. Both things are on the table. I will say that in the defense of the judges, too, with the viewpoint. But you're right. Both things are on the table because we have that dynamic here. Next fight. Sorry. I got Luana-Pinheiro, -165. And I got to say, I saw you all in the chat. You guys love the mom champ. Yeah. Michelle Waterson, +135. By the way, I love the Miami Vice thing. I genuinely do that photo. Except everybody looks cool, but then I notice they gotta sexualize the Asian lady. They gotta put Michelle Waterson, but she's in the mom jeans, showing her butt in mom jeans. I don't understand it. It's mom champ. Yeah. Anyways, sorry, I have to do that for the fans. Sorry for your ears, folks. I have no opinion on this fight. I could just see Waterson's more move to more conservative fundamental boxing and takedowns actually paying off for her, because Luana-Pinheiro is still a bit raw and newer. But even if I end up siding with the veteran, this is not a fight that I would want to play, even if I end up picking the plus money. Any opinions here, Luca?
Yeah, mostly in the same opinion. I've not researched it yet, but just off the top of my head, my opinion's basically Michelle Waterson. I don't really think she has that much left in the tank as a fighter. I feel like she's on a noticeable decline, and it's just kind of, the Jorge Masvidal situation, one foot out the door. She's facing someone who's on the come up right now, who's getting better each fight. It's one of those matchups where you're kind of trying to gauge who's better at this point in time. But the problem with these types of fights is you can analyze the tape assuming both fighters are here, right? But if Michelle Waterson goes out there and regresses, now she's down here. Well, now all of a sudden the pick'em fight became advantage to her opponent. What if her opponent's actually improved? Now a pick'em fight going to an advantage to her opponent is a big advantage to her opponent. Right. And trying to gauge where it is in there, that's where the difficulty comes. Because you have a big difference between, say, a pick'em fight and -250. And so these types of matchups, I generally tend to err on the side of caution. These are types of fights where we talked about earlier in the podcast, where you're kind of focusing on where you have the highest ROI. For me personally, it's not just anecdotal. I know factually from going back and looking at my data, I tend to do better on fights where there is more known information, where I can actually use my skills as a handicapper to go, here's a data point, here's how I think this is going to play out, versus going, I think Michelle's going to look this level of quality. I think her opponent, those types of matchups, there's so much guesswork in a sport and a situation where there's already a bunch of guesswork, that it starts to skew your opinion and perception of the matchup, where it becomes almost to the point where you don't really have a good read on it. And so it's not that I'm unfamiliar with these two fighters and what they bring to the table, but given the dynamic at the point in time of their careers that they're facing, it's one that's just automatically almost a total pass for me.
Hard agree, and arguably a perfect segue to the next fight. There is no default all things, right? As far as MMA betting, always bet, and when you have this situation, always go here. Context is everything, but I agree as far as what are we doing? We're betting on more of a proven product here, right? Now, it's a bit shaky and it's a bit volatile because it's MMA. It's even more volatile because it's WMMA. That's not picking on women here. That's just the truth, right? It's just like your judging market goes from volatile to extra volatile when you're in Texas or across the pond. Same thing here for WMMA. It's not an intended slight toward anybody or anything in particular. That being said, kind of like with this next fight here, we have again, we got Contender Series favorite Joe Pyfer. Beat Joe Pyfer at -200. He actually opened 3-1. It came down to earth a bit. We got GM3 Gerald Meerschaert +160. I know he's an older guy. He's slower. He's not the sexiest type of dude to bet on. He's not, screaming with muscles and athleticism, but he's got a lot of opportunism. He's got a lot of experience. And like I said with Pineda and Lutz, another time when you have the Contender Series favorite over the more proven product, a guy with a ton of fights, another do-or-die guy, not as do-or-die Meerschaert is as Pineda, for example, but say what you will about Pineda, say what you will about Meerschaert, both have plenty of faults. I am not disagreeing with that. But the thing is, we know they're false. What's better, Luca, the devil you know or the devil you don't know, right? So even if we're talking about devils and those kind of aspects, I still would rather go with the known product. And we know what we're going to get. Again, he trains with a good camp, Joe Pyfer. He actually, even though he's 0-1 against UFC level southpaws, he actually looked good and jabbed with the southpaw, as well as the classic outside foot awareness when he fought a guy named Troutman at CFFC. But that Troutman guy was fighting on short notice. He looked the whole weight class and a half down. He looked like he fought at welterweight. Maybe even looks like he could have made lightweight. So how much do you really take from that? I know Joe Pyfer had to fight short notice too. Let's not take away from him. Again, he looked good there, but it wasn't against known quantities. You know, we don't have a lot of that information. His only known UFC quantities fought was Alan Amadovsky, who is literally the worst fighter, not just in any division he competes in. I'm not trying to be mean to the guy, but he's just one of the worst fighters since, and I don't want to be mean to this guy either, but that Cristololo guy or whatever, Anthony Cristololo or whatever, like, you know, I'm talking about
Christodoulou?
Yeah, Todoulou. Yeah, like
Christodoulou back in the day. Oh
yeah.
My goodness. I remember watching tape when he was signed to the UFC, and I was like, someone at the UFC heard about this man, viewed footage of this man, and then went, yeah, he's UFC caliber.
Lightweight, by the way, lightweight division, the lightweight division. That's
the best division of the organization as well.
Like, yeah, exactly. So I'm not trying to like go on a shit fest here, but you know what I'm saying? Like, that's who he's won, you know, and now he's going against GM3, who, again, this isn't a lower weight class. This is a higher, you know, you can be older at middleweight, and GM3 is still in his mid-30s. He's still not that ancient, you know. Oh, he's slow. It's like people be like, anytime you pick or play Ed Herman, right? You're like, Ed Herman's slow. Like, he's always been slow. He was like Bane. He was born in the darkness. Like, I'm not saying it's a positive. I'm not saying you're wrong, but let's not like act like this is news or it's some development because he's older. Like, no, the guy's been working with what he can get. And Joe Pyfer, he's only seen a third round twice if we're counting his amateur career. And if we're counting his amateur career, he's only won one of those two occasions. He's been submitted by low-level guys, including like a Jonathan Pati guy or whatever, who was like a short-notice replacement on Contender Series, and he didn't even look like he belonged on Contender Series. No offense to that guy. That guy guillotined him on short notice as well. And now he's facing a guy against GM3 who's not only seen third rounds, but we got to get going here, Luca. I don't have time to go through all his third round finishes. You know, GM3 lives in that third round. So I ended up playing GM3 for the dog money plus 165 for a unit. House doesn't offer the method, so I took round 2 plus 900, 0.17 U there, plus 1200, round 3, 0.17 U. And in the house that offers methods, you know GM3 will go for a sub, even when he's out striking a striker in Bruno Silva, a dangerous one, mind you, which he did in his last fight. Round 2 sub plus 1200 and round 3 sub for GM3 plus 1400. Again, 17 unit sprinkles apiece. It can lose, that's fine, but I don't feel as bad on these spots, you know. Hopefully it wins like the Daniel Pineda one where, you know, Tucker Lutz ended up being, again, nothing against Tucker Lutz or if you picked him or whatever, but like that guy shouldn't have been the biggest favorite on the card. And Joe Pyfer is not the biggest favorite on this card, but goddamn, they opened him over 3-1, I believe, over GM3. And he's still a favorite. So it's a show me spot. I could lose it, but I'll still be fine because I put my money on the known product and I was on the plus money. So you're going to give me both those things in one shot? I'll take it.
Yeah, my thing with this fight, I've not researched it yet, but obviously familiar with both fighters. We'll get to probably tomorrow on the research front. My thing with Gerald here is if you look at his actual record in the UFC, yes, he's lost, you know, some of the better fighters. Like, I'm not going to hold him losing, you know, to Khamzat necessarily against him. But if you look at who he's who he's beat, that's what more concerns me. I mean, it's mostly like unrecognizable names, or even for people like you and me who are very educated in the sport, you have to sit there and go like, who was that again? Like, he hasn't really beat anybody of note. Or the guys that you do remember are guys, you know, like Bruno Silva or like Eric Spicely, for example. And so, not to say that, you know, you can pick fights just solely on this method, but I do kind of factor into this. So I go, is Joe Pyfer better than, you know, those guys of the world? And I do think he is. The question is how much better, because obviously he's very unproven. He's getting that, you know, the Contender Series hype and all that stuff. So there's definitely concerns that I have about Joe's game. But the thing with Gerald is just, he's kind of proven to me that he's never really been able to be capable of beating anyone all that good. And for the most part, not only does he lose to those types of fighters, but he usually loses in a bad manner to them as well, where even if it's a decision, he just kind of looks listless in there. If it's a stoppage, it's a bad stoppage. So I definitely understand a lot of what you're saying, and I actually don't disagree with it. It's a type of matchup where I could honestly even see him having success, and then it's like you get like that veteran underdog, and he's doing great, and maybe he's up, after the first round, and it's midway through the second, and it's looking great, or maybe he's even up 2-0, and then that chin shows, or he gets taken down
Right.
and just thrashed on the mat or something. Like, he is kind of one of those fighters where that kind of stuff happens to him, where even look at the Khamzat fight. Who else does Khamzat do that to? He goes out there
Right.
and takes you down, and he hits you with 300 strikes. That's how he hurts you and finishes you. He doesn't just one-punch someone into oblivion, and so that's kind of the issue with Gerald. It's kind of to an extent like what we talked about with the Israel matchup earlier, where he kind of has to fight the perfect fight and just not take a shot, or kind of like Rob Font, for example, as well. And as we've talked about, those fights, it's very hard to be trustworthy and really, have a lot of conviction with them. So in this case, you are getting him as a decent underdog price. So I definitely, like I said, I understand where you're coming from with your logic, even though I'm personally not playing it. Ultimately,
Right.
it's a fight that I'm passing. I'm not betting Pyfer for some of the reasons, you mentioned. Like I said, I do somewhat see where you're coming from. So for me, this type of matchup, it's kind of like the last one we talked about, where you're kind of trying to gauge where they each are in addition to the skill and style matchup. It's not so much that Meerschaert, I feel like, is, on a serious decline. As you talked about, yes, he's slow, but he's always been slow. He's used to dealing with that. It's not something, that he's suddenly having to adjust his game, where, you have a guy like Dan Henderson, like we talked about, used to walking through the fire, eating everything you have and not getting really that hurt from it. Well, once that's not the case anymore, once jabs are putting him down, he has to change his whole game if he wants to continue to win. It's not the case with Gerald. He's used to being slow. He's used to being in this kind of physical version of himself. So is he declining? Sure, but I don't expect him to, to go out there and look like he's suddenly shot or suddenly worse. It's more about how much does Pyfer go out there and actually improve. And so based on some of the skill and stylistic things that I mentioned, plus the potential improvement for Pyfer, that's why I'm staying away from taking the shot on Gerald here, even though I am picking Joe with some hesitation.
Wow, I mean, I wouldn't even be surprised if you pick Pyfer, you know what I'm saying? Because he could get the knockout, like Luca's saying. And if you guys aren't feeling as bullish on me, Luca brings up great points. And I think you could parlay those points into a live betting opportunity, because obviously Joe is more live earlier than he is later, whereas Gerald's more live later with the experience and the fact that he's been there and Joe hasn't. So if he does, if Gerald does, and he could very well get knocked out, I know that making this bet, but if he doesn't, then maybe you have a nice live line, right, there to look for. And you can, maybe just, if you want to punt ahead, maybe you just sprinkle small on round 3 if it gets there to either hedge a Joe Pyfer play, or again, you like Meerschaert, you're picking him. You just don't feel like bullish as I do. You don't want to expose yourself, which is totally fine, by the way. You either maybe sprinkle small on round 3 or don't, or just wait to see what he does live. I will say with the MMA math goes, Pyfer did lose via injury, granted, to Dustin Stolfus, and of course, Gerald Meerschaert, I believe one of his many round 3 finishes and submissions, did him in that way there. But it was by an injury, though I will say I don't like it when a guy like Dustin Stolfus, who's not big, physical, or known for his wrestling, gets probably the best and easiest takedown I've ever seen Dustin Stolfus get in his career on Joe Pyfer. I don't think that bodes well for him. For Meerschaert, who has underrated wrestling as a wrestling coach, not just a Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu black belt, but also training down in South Florida. And again, he's beaten guys how well that aged, maybe not as well as you would think, but still he was a big underdog there. So he's been able to pull off big wins in this transitionary period. But something to keep in mind on Meerschaert's recent record is that he was in a transitionary period like many Rufus sport fighters who not so coincidentally struggled. There was, I don't know if there was drama or what, but there was like a departing there, right? And we saw that with the Woodley, the Pettises, the Meerschaerts, Askarins, right? They all kind of split. Now he's settled in a very strong camp at Killcliff FC. And last note before moving forward, again, no, I get that Joe Pyfer is a favorite, but I just love these spots because they feel so disrespectful. And the thing I noticed about Joe Pyfer, in fights that he won or lost, even in fights where Luca, he was winning the striking and would eventually win by knockout, he still shot takedowns that he didn't necessarily need to do. Now, maybe he likes that as a part of his game. He's apparently proved his grappling a lot since going down and working with Sean Brady, Daniel Gracie, and Henzo Gracie Philly. That would make sense. But do you really want to be shooting takedowns, even if you got your guy hurt? Like Gerald Meerschaert, when Gerald Meerschaert has one of the best guillotines and transitions and sweeps, even if he can't get the finish, he sweeps guys with guillotines all the time. That's also something that worries me here for the submission. So, again, go ahead.
That's actually one thing that concerns me too about Joe here is that in these types of prospect versus veteran matchups, they can fall into that trap of, like, say he's going out there, he's maybe dominating or maybe just clearly beating Gerald, and maybe, like you're mentioning, starts mixing in takedowns. He gets a little bit overconfident where he feels like, oh, I'm much better than this person. I can kind of maybe work on some other aspects of my game, try to, round out some areas where I'm weak. But then they get caught because they're facing a crafty veteran who's much more experienced and aware of those types of situations, or maybe they fight in a poor manner, gas themselves out. Stuff like that happens all the time with these types of prospects. And Gerald Meerschaert is absolutely the type of veteran who has the skills to, if you make a glaring mistake, he can capitalize. So he does have legit finishing skills and abilities, and he will latch onto them. He will even go for submissions that maybe he's putting himself in not necessarily the best position. If he fails them, he might actually be in a position to get finished himself. That's also one of the reasons why his fights tend to end up in a finish a lot. And so with a guy like him, it is worth noting that he is pretty much all throughout this contest, whether he's winning or losing, going to be looking for those little opportunities to capitalize on basically a silly mistake by Joe.
And last thing, silly mistakes are usually made when the fighter is on the come up. And unless that CFFC crowd had a really small crowd, but I imagine it was no bigger than an Apex crowd, looking at Joe's record, I don't think he's fought in a live crowd since 2019. So that's almost 4 years. Now he's going to be in a big, raucous live crowd again. And that's where the veteran savvy starts to be worth a little more points, right? Because, again, it's usually overexcited. And how is it from Conor
Tiring
McGregor?
out.
Yeah, even if the guy is a prospect like a Conor McGregor, even those guys get prospect losses. And what are the prospect losses? Literally, like 90% of the time, it's submissions. It's not decisions and knockouts even as much. It's submissions. That's where people fuck up. And that's where Gerald
usually the submissions are a result of them tiring out. And usually them tiring out is either fighting poorly, becoming overzealous, gunning for the finish too much, maybe fighting in a way that's not smart for their game plan, or getting in a way, they're a striker and they choose to grapple with a grappler and they end up getting into these exchanges with someone where that's their strength. They can go for days grappling where you're a striker, now you end up tiring out. It's usually those kind of situations like you're mentioning where they fight poorly. That does happen sometimes, but it's usually...
Yeah, sure.
Yeah, it's usually you can kind of see the wheels starting to fall off as it goes along.
Absolutely. I'll probably have GM3 by sub in the round robin, but again, I got him on the money line for a unit and then sprinkled on 2 and 3/2 and 3 by sub. Let's push through the rest of this turbo breakdown fast. I don't really got much to say about Sherman, plus 310. Quick turnaround for Carl Williams, who I just saw live, minus 400. Shout out to my guy Martin in the DMs. He said, I don't even remember that we saw that fight live. Martin, if you're listening, I don't remember too, buddy, and that's because you bought me a second beer while I was still trying to finish my first one. And old Dan Tom got fucked up because they decided to lead into the main card and start the main card in the light heavyweight and heavyweight division. So I actually blacked out of this part because of, again, another reason why card structures are important. So I have nothing to say, and we'll probably pick Carl Williams to wrestle. Anything here, Luca?
I have not researched this fight whatsoever, and unlike the other fights, which I will most likely, almost assuredly get to, I will almost assuredly not research this one.
I don't blame
this
you.
Is one of those
I don't
fights
blame you.
It's one of those fights like we talked about at the beginning of the podcast where you just look at it and go, I'm just going to cross that out and not even bother with that one.
Yeah, this one a little more meaningful, more of a sample size, but still easy breakdown here. Pereira-Adesanya minus 300, Cynthia Calvillo plus 240. I got a soft spot for Cynthia, but you cannot lie, man. It's not been inspiring to watch her fight in there. Mentally, it's just from ghosts to demons. It feels like the road. I don't like what I see. I don't think fixing or changing weight classes will change that scenario. And again, not to pick on and pile on Cynthia, it's more of a shot at Dana here. But again, this was someone else that he really wanted to promote. And again, not to pick on Cynthia, much less older fighters, because I sympathize. You all know me. I love the old fighters, hence some of my bets here. She is also quietly older than you would think. I'm just going to put that out there. So I don't like it. Maybe I tail some of my Action Network colleagues. I think someone might be taking a flyer on Godinez at plus 800 by TKO. Maybe I fuck around and throw something small on that. But honestly, outside of something fun like that, I'm not touching this fight, and I'll probably pick Godinez. Anything here, Luca?
Yeah, well, I think you nailed the biggest point here is I don't know what's going on with Cynthia Calvillo at this point. I mean, when she was being hyped as a prospect 4 years ago in the UFC, as you mentioned, the age, she was already past 30 at that point and very, very raw. I was never high on her as a prospect, not only because of that, but also because of the other thing. She's an okay offensive grappler who has some decent scrambling ability with some very limited striking that's going to get absolutely pieced up by the upper echelon of the division. Her wrestling is not good enough to take down those fighters. Like, unless she rapidly improved as a fighter, she never was really going to go anywhere as a prospect. And again, she was already like 31 years old at that time. So I just never really thought all that much of her as a prospect because of that. And then since then, I mean, she's looked even worse than I would have expected. She's on what, like a 4-fight losing streak now, I think. So it's not just that she's lost; she's just looked disastrous in those. I mean, you talk about fighters going out there and regressing to a point where they're no longer themselves. She's a perfect example of that. She just stands there and doesn't do anything. Like, she'll be in close fights where even her opponent isn't doing anything, and she's just standing there, just staring, not doing anything, just being completely ineffective when she does try something. So the UFC's obviously given her a lot of leeway keeping her around in the UFC. I feel like this is probably the last hurrah, though. I cannot imagine her sticking around after another loss here. It might even be a situation where with a lackluster snoozer type of a win, they could even cut her as well, depending on the contract situation. But either way, I think she is on her way out.
Absolutely. All right, we're both on the same page there. We got Ignacio Bahamondes minus 350, Trey Ogden plus 275. Bahamondes coming back off of a bit of a layoff due to visa issues, so he could be improved, but whether he's improved or not, I like him against Ogden, who is making a quick turnaround. Have not looked into this fight, probably won't, to steal a line from you, Luca, but I'll probably end up picking the favorite. Any thoughts here? Luca? Oh, he is frozen. All right, I'll see if I can get him back here on Skype as I close out. I'm probably going to take the favorites on the rest. Maybe Sam Hughes is a dog. Let me see here if I can re-ring my guy Luca. Hopefully you guys are still seeing me. Da-da-da-da. All right, looks like I'm still connected to the internet. Feel free to comment if you're watching live. I'm going to try to let me know you guys are still breathing. Shoot a comment if you're listening to this now. I'm going to see if I can't get Luca back here. Going to quit Skype and sign back onto that and see if that helps because it's not responding. Anyone alive in the chat? We see you. Okay, Brad Tasher, the Tony Puddins in there. I saw that earlier. That was hilarious. Gonna try Luca back, and then we'll recap and get out of here. I know it was a long show, but it's a good one. I got someone to go back and forth with, which is always nice. All right, I think he's calling. It's going through the mobile, but I'm rebooting here on the old Skype. Let me get him on here. Da-da-da-da. I will call you, sir. All right. Sorry, redialing my man Luca right now. And hopefully we'll get the show back. But yeah, I don't have much on Sherman-Williams or Steve Garcia. Probably pick Nuerdanbieke. And I'll probably pick the dog, Sam Hughes, just because it's WMMA. But I don't think I'll really be looking into that fight. And I don't think I'll be investing much, even if I did. But it looks like my guy Luca's stuff died. I don't know if we can get him back here on mobile and maybe get him back through that way. But I'll recap my picks and plays if not, and he can't join up or I can't connect. But yeah, I don't have anything to say on those fights anyway. So I'll do a recap here for my picks and plays. I'm gonna be taking Pereira over Adesanya. I'll be taking Burns over Masvidal. Taking Yanez over Font. Probably leaning Holland over Ponzinibbio. Check my quick picks and plays. I will be taking. Gonna wrap and will plug your stuff for you. Yeah, I don't think we can get back on. I think his phone died, and I'm having a lag issues here. But yeah, we'll probably end up taking Rosas Jr. over Christian Rodriguez, taking Chris Curtis over Gastelum. We'll see if I take Champ, over Pinheiro, but I'm not playing it. Taking Meerschaert over Pyfer, GM3, Coop Troop. Taking Carl Williams. Taking Carl Williams over Chase Sherman. Taking Lupita-Godinez over Cynthia Calvillo. Bahamondes over Ogden. I'm going to try calling one more time here. Bahamondes over Ogden. I'm going to take probably Garcia-Nuerdanbieke over Garcia. Again, staying away from these ones, not looking into them. Probably going to take Hughes-Amorim, but I have not looked into that one. Luca, are you with me, buddy? Can I hear you? Can you talk? Sweet. Yeah, I can hear you. You were on the show. They can hear you too. So, there you are, and we can see you. Thank you. I'm just wrapping up my.
I don't know if you can hear me.
No, I can hear you. You sound great. I just wrapped up my picks. I'm going to recap my plays, and then I can throw it over to you. You sound. I hear you though. I hear you. Let me see here. I'm taking Pereira plus 117, 1.5 units. Taking Curtis. Taking Curtis plus 110 for 1 unit. Taking GM3 plus 165 for 1 unit. Also taking GM3 round 2 plus 900, 0.17 U, round 3 plus 1200, 0.17 U, and 1 house, round 2 sub plus 1200, 0.17 U, round 3 sub plus 1400, 0.17 U, Pereira by decision plus 550, half a unit, and let me see, let me try to call him one more time here. And we got Burns inside the distance, plus 100. Bohemio. Got the Brazilian, My Buddy Doll, 1.5 units for that inside the distance prop. And round 3, plus 1,000, 0.17 units. And, of course, my house that allows me to do the method, I did that there. Round 3 sub, plus 1,200. My round robin will probably be Pereira by decision. GM3 by sub. Burns round 3, and I am still looking for a 4th. I am looking for my Cinderelli. Get some money to feed my belly, hopefully to fill out the rest. I'm having trouble getting my guy Luca on here, but I want you guys to give him a follow if you haven't already. He is at Luca Fury on Twitter, where he seems to be most active. And he is on Patreon if you want to see exactly what his bets, get all his up-to-date analysis. It's Fury's Fight Picks, just like his old podcast, the old school thing. He kept it the same. Patreon.com/Fury's Fight Picks. I appreciate Luca. I'm sorry that to Luca and to you guys for the technical difficulties. I hope I did him justice with this sign-off, because I cannot tell you how grateful I am for him to be a guest on here. Booking things are hard. It's hard. Time is valuable for him, for me, for you, for everybody, which is why I respect it so much. Sorry we went long. Appreciate you all listening live and in the future. Likes, 5-star ratings, reviews, shares. Super chat is over, but thank you for anybody who contributed. You can still give super whatever donations on the YouTube channel on this video. Secure PayPal links at Mixed Martial Analyst. Oh, I better plug my stuff, right? Might as well. Especially for this here free show that I'm offering you. MixedMartialAnalyst.com supports this here free program where you can find Amazon and On It click-throughs. Didn't read off the list. Don't worry. It doesn't give you your information out. It just tells me what was bought. So it lets me know people are supporting. Of course, there is a PayPal.com link. Dan Tom MMA. You can find me there. Of course, it's also in my link tree at Dan Tom MMA. As you can see in the name tag, follow me on Twitter at the PYM Podcast. On all social platforms, follows are appreciated. Don't pollute your feed, please. All the shares and all the content, it doesn't cost you anything, and it really means a lot, especially in this day and age and misinformation. So easy to get lost in the shuffle. Your support means a lot. Sorry I wasn't able to get to a lot of you directly in the chat. Thank you for your participation. Good luck on your picks and plays, and always protect your neck.